His Dragon Princess. The Dragon Kings of Fire and Ice, Book 8, by Amelia Shaw. Narrated by Catherine Bilson. Prologue. 18 months ago. Veronica. My parents refused to let me leave the castle. Again. I'd asked them to be reasonable. I'd begged them to understand. I'd even pleaded with them. Then I'd started yelling. There was no convincing them to allow me to go anywhere without them. They were leaving me with no other option than to break free of my gilded cage, whether they liked it or not. I was 18 now, and with 2 older brothers to look after my parents' kingdom, what use was I? People were speaking loudly in the dining room as I passed, and I stopped in the hallway outside the room, listening hard to try and figure out what was happening. It was breakfast time, and there was an unfamiliar male voice I wasn't expecting to hear. Who could that be? I altered my previous trajectory toward the library and, instead, pushed open the door to the dining room. My gaze fell on one of the men I'd grown up with. Not the one I always feared seeing, but a dragon prince nonetheless. "Hi, Veronica." Despite the anger of my previous argument with my parents still boiling in my veins, seeing him made me smile. "Anthony! I didn't know you were here." I rushed forward for a hug. The secret plans inside my head to leave the castle and the protection of my family were already making me homesick, and saying goodbye to Anthony would make the farewell even worse. I clung to the man who'd been like an older brother to me when I was growing up. The barely dressed prince pulled out of our hug and gave me an awkward smile. "It wasn't planned. I just started flying and found myself here." That didn't sound like Anthony, but then he had always been cagey about his emotions. I reached for his hands and gripped his fingers, wanting him to know that he had a friend. "You know, it's always good to see you." But as soon as I said the words, blindness overtook me. The world around me dropped away to darkness, but inside my mind a vision coalesced and became strong. I was standing by the window in our palace, upstairs in my favourite reading room. I was wearing a gown of royal purple, a dress I didn't own. My eyes burned with hot tears as I stared at that version of myself. I was heavily pregnant and smiling in a content way. That simply couldn't be. Contentment was a feeling I'd never known. Ever. Why would I be happy to be having a baby? This vision made no sense. How far into the future was this? My hand rested on my huge belly, and then I turned toward the sound of footsteps echoing in the room as my heart leapt with happiness. I didn't want to see the next part and squeezed my eyes shut. But I couldn't stop the images being projected into my mind by the prince still gripping my hands. The father of my child stepped out of the shadows, a smile on his face that I'd never witnessed before. Ian? Ian? No, that was impossible. He hated me. He always had. Before I could see any more lies, I ripped my hands out of Anthony's hold and the vision stopped. My normal eyesight immediately returned, and with it I saw Anthony, looking pale and drawn, and staring at me with a wary look in his eyes. "Asshole! What the hell was that?" I yelled at him, shaking with the need to shift. My dragon was furious and confused. So many other emotions, too. I couldn't even sort out one hot flash of anger from other deeper feelings, and it just made me and my dragon even more upset. I needed to shift and fly far away. Anthony ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. That's never happened before." "Bullshit. You know exactly what just happened. You're a sorcerer, just like your mom." "What happened?" Dad demanded, rushing to our side. "Oh, it was nothing," Anthony said quickly, then looked over to me with a look of unmistakable fear. I turned to tell my father exactly what I'd seen. When he grabbed my hand, I saw... I saw... I stopped, partly out of empathy for Anthony's obvious distress over the situation, but also for my own selfish reasons. Ian was the youngest son of King Stavrock, my mother's cousin. I couldn't believe fate would tie me into a marriage with my own cousin, surely. But Mom and Dad would. They completely believed in fated mates. After all, their marriage was the product of fate's choice. But I wouldn't be. No matter what they said or demanded of me, I would not marry Ian because Anthony had seen it and communicated that to me in a vision. No. I lifted my chin and turned to my father, changing the subject for all of our sakes. Dad, why have I been restricted in all my flight plans this month? I tried to organise to go and see Kayla, but was told I couldn't. Dad turned to Mom, then glanced back at me. Veronica, we've gone over this. You are a princess. You can't just fly off whenever you want to God knows where. You know what happened to your mother. I rolled my eyes and crossed my arms over my chest. Yeah, she was kidnapped by your half-brothers, which led to the reunification of your family, Dad. That was never a bad thing. Mom walked over, annoyance at my attitude written all over her pale face. Veronica, you have responsibilities here. I don't! I groaned, gesturing to her with my hand. That's the problem, Mom. You do. Dad does. Even my brothers do. I have nothing to do here, absolutely nothing, except hang around and watch everyone else live life to the fullest. Mom reached out a hand to me. You can shadow me, learn the ropes of being a queen. I shook her off. I'll never be a queen, Mum, here or anywhere else. Even if that stupid vision was right, Ian was the youngest son and would never inherit. I may as well learn some basic skills. Maybe cooking or sewing. Dad groaned. Veronica, you are a princess. Shadow your mother with her responsibilities for our people. Helping the less fortunate. Volunteering. I groaned and covered my face with my hands. He didn't stop. Or shadow me and learn about our kingdom. Politics. You have an incredibly bright mind. I don't want that going to waste. I dropped my hands and glanced at Anthony, who looked lost in thought. Was he still stewing over the vision he'd shared? He was going to be no help here at all. I continued to argue back and forth with my parents about being allowed out, but it was clearly useless. At the back of my mind, a new plan was forming. Now that I'd seen what Anthony showed me, I didn't want to just leave the castle. With this new information about Ian, I needed to leave the realm. Now I just had to work out where to go and how I could get there. A month later. Veronica. Anthony's wedding was the last family event I'd agreed to attend before my trip. As I stared around at the guests, I noticed Ian standing with my brother and some other mutual friends. I decided to give them a wide berth. But there was one person I wanted to speak to before I finally flew away. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a nearby waiter and walked over to the groom. Anthony raised an eyebrow at me. Hitting the alcohol now, dragon daughter. I tossed my long blonde hair over my shoulder, annoyed at him after only one sentence. I'm 18, I said. It's legal in our realm, even if it isn't everywhere in the human world. Then I took a sip of champagne to prove my point. Covering the wince that accompanied the tart taste was the hardest part. So what are you doing standing over here? I asked him, turning to stand by his side so we could both stare at the dance floor. Surveying your kingdom? He scoffed. Second-born son, child. Haven't you learned how things go? I punched him in the arm, hard. I was third-born and a girl. Didn't he understand that I was the one who had no purpose in life? Hey, Anthony glared at me. It's my wedding day. You're meant to be nice to me. I narrowed my eyes but kept my mouth shut. He was right. I went back to sipping my terrible champagne and scowled at the room in general instead of specifically at him. Anthony stared at his beautiful wife, who was dancing with his father, King Eric. Love was written all over Anthony's face, making me uncomfortable. I needed to change the focus. "It's still your kingdom, you know." I bit my lip, recalling some information my mother had passed along. Everyone knew about Anthony's magic now. "You're the sorcerer now, yeah?" He shrugged. "I suppose. My mom's been teaching me how to use my magic, but I'm decades behind her." I grinned. It was nice to see him finally accepting his role. It was obvious he'd been fighting his magic for a long time. "Yeah, but your mom's not going anywhere, so you have time to learn." Marianne was barely 50. He had many years to learn her secrets. "True," Anthony said with a heavy sigh. I empathized. None of us liked to think about the day our powerful parents would leave this world. I certainly didn't want to entertain the thought. My dad was the most amazing man I'd ever known. He'd rebuilt our kingdom from the ashes of war. He was more amazing than a phoenix and a sorcerer put together. Doubt suddenly assailed me. Maybe I was doing the wrong thing, leaving my parents and my whole world behind. "What do you need, dragon daughter?" Anthony asked suddenly, dragging me out of my thoughts. I glanced up at the man who'd shown me a vision I never asked for. He didn't say anything more, so I knew it was time that I asked the questions for which I'd been dying to know the answers. "You know when you came over for lunch that time, a few weeks ago?" My heart began to pound a little harder, and my stomach clenched with the stress of even bringing up this topic. Anthony studied me. "Oh, you mean when I accidentally gave you a vision of your future?" "Yes." I wanted to scream at him, but instead I choked down another sip of champagne and nodded mutely instead. "So, what are you going to do about it?" Anthony asked. "Nothing," I said, gathering my courage and tipping my head back to finish the rest of my drink. Yuck. "What do you mean, nothing?" He chuckled softly. "You know who your fated mate is, and you're going to ignore him." Fated mate? No. There was no way Ian was the man I was meant to marry. Anthony had to be wrong, but I wasn't about to tell the newly married sorcerer that his vision was dodgy. Instead, I changed the subject. There was no point arguing with him. "I've taken a job in the human world," I confessed quietly. "I'm leaving next week." Anthony's jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me?" "Nope. I'm going to look after some kids for a family I met online. Maybe travel Europe for a while." Anthony stared at me like I was insane. "And your parents are just letting you go?" They were, even if they didn't know it yet. "Let them try and stop me." Anthony shook his head. "You're running away from your future, which is very interesting, Veronica. I thought you were the fearless one among us. But I won't be the one to try and talk you out of it. Hell, I've been running away from who I am my whole life. Until recently. I won't throw stones." I glared at the impudent prince. "I'm not running away from who I am." He burst out laughing. "Oh, baby girl, you are. You're a dragon princess. You're the fated mate of a prince. You don't have to work a day in your life, and instead of enjoying your position and doing good in your kingdom, you're going to escape to a whole other realm and plan to travel and work for humans. Makes perfect sense." My jaw dropped as I stared at Anthony. The gall. I wasn't sure what to yell at him most about. The fact that he thought I was an entitled bitch, or that he'd just called me a baby. Before I could ask him more questions or demand that he tell me the truth about my future, Anthony's new wife Charity walked up, red in the face from dancing too long. "What are you two talking about?" "'Cause whatever it is, count me in. I need something funny to take my mind off this nausea." "Dad twirl you around too many times?" Anthony asked her. She burped a little, then covered her mouth and said, "Excuse me." Anthony hugged his wife tightly. "You're beautiful." Charity rolled her eyes. "I feel disgusting, but I'm glad I look pretty." "You look amazing," I rushed to say, annoyed at myself for not extending my salutations. "And congratulations on your pregnancy. And the wedding." Charity grinned with obvious pride. "Thanks. We were going to keep it quiet, but the moment I hit 6 weeks I started vomiting and, well, it's been impossible to keep quiet since." "I think we should dance," Anthony said, and his wife beamed up at him. "Oh, that would be lovely." She turned to me. "Lovely to see you again, Veronica." Anthony lifted his sorcerer's hand to wriggle his fingers at me. "You sure you don't want another vision?" Hell no. The first one had been bad enough. I backed away so fast Anthony laughed at me and called out, "Bye, dragon daughter." I ran away, not afraid to admit that I was nervous about spending any more time with Anthony. My future awaited, and it was in the human realm, not here with Ian or my parents, or anything to do with my dragon shifter genes. Chapter 1. Current day. Veronica. I lifted the screaming, red-faced baby up and out of her crib, bouncing on the spot as I'd been taught to do by one of the children's other nannies. "It's okay, sweetheart. Don't cry. Mommy and Daddy will be home soon." The baby immediately calmed as I held her in my arms. I wiped her tears away with a clean face washer before resettling her for the long night ahead. This family loved having kids, but they certainly didn't hang around long enough to bond with them. "Good girl," I cooed at the infant. "Mommy and Daddy have way too much money, don't they?" I was one of 3 nannies the parents had hired to look after their 5 children. I wouldn't have stayed working for them as long as I had, except for the fact that they took amazing holidays to exotic destinations. Luckily for us, the parents couldn't go anywhere without our help, so they took the nannies with them everywhere they went. We were currently in Greece, staying on a little island I could walk around in a single day. The weather was spectacular, and I had what the humans called a tan. As the daughter of the king of the Winter Palace, I'd never known my skin could be any other colour than pure white. Every time I caught sight of myself in a mirror, I wanted to burst out laughing from the shock. I had 2 days off every week to travel and sightsee. There weren't many jobs like this one, and my responsibilities ended and began with keeping the baby happy. Compared to running a kingdom, I counted myself blessed. A vibrating in my back pocket caught my attention. My cell phone. Weird. Who would be calling me at this time of night? I placed the sleeping baby back in her crib, then snuck out of the bedroom and raced down to my own tiny sleeping quarters. The text was from my older brother. "Shit! There's been an accident. Dad's hurt. You need to come home." My father was King Damon, the king of the Winter Palace, a formidable and dangerous foe. My heart pounded sickeningly in my chest as I typed back. "What happened? Is he okay? He's healing, yeah?" As I hit send, a million thoughts raced through my mind. He couldn't be really hurt. He just couldn't. Dragon shifters healed quickly, supernaturally. My brother's response took so long, my fingers were white from gripping the phone by the time the shocking response came through. "No, he's not okay. He fell. Shards of glass got in his lungs. Marianne's coming, but you should come home." A sob rose to my lips as I texted back. "I will. Is everyone else okay?" My brother wouldn't ask me to come home unless something was really wrong with Dad, so I wasn't sure why I asked about anyone else. A final message from my brother had tears coursing down my cheeks. "Ian was working here with Dad. He's missing. No one can find him. "I'm coming," I typed in, as fast as my numb fingers and blurry eyes could manage. What did he mean that Ian was missing? We were dragon shifters. We didn't just disappear. True panic raced up my spine, making my nerves tingle and hurt. I had to go, now. There wasn't a minute to waste. Oh my God, oh my God. Not Dad. And not Ian. I still hadn't reconciled Anthony's vision within my heart. I'd ignored it. Called him a liar and a troublemaker 100 times over. Ian couldn't be my fated mate. He just couldn't. But as I searched inside myself for that strange part of me that had always been too aware of Ian, I found it alight and hurting. Damn it. That is not good. I raced to the tiny bedroom I shared with Narelle, a blonde Dutch girl a few years older than me. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, sitting bolt upright on her bed where she was reading. "No," I gasped out, swiping at my cheeks to dispel the wetness and proof of my grief. I had to get it together to fly home. I was no use to anyone if I couldn't find the portal. I reached for an explanation that the human would understand. "My dad's sick. I have to go home." I grabbed my bright pink suitcase from under the bed and started throwing all my clothes inside. Narelle jumped to her feet. "You want help?" I didn't know how to answer her. My whole body was shaking and I couldn't think. I didn't have much time to decide, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to take all this stuff home with me. "How about I do the bathroom?" she suggested. I nodded because I didn't know how to say no. Ian, oh God. He couldn't be dead. He couldn't be. Beyond the panic, I could hear my mother's voice inside my head, calm and strong. "Focus, Veronica. Focus. You need to get home safe." I closed my eyes and took some steady breaths to slow my heart rate down. My dad was going to be fine. I just knew it. And Ian? He was probably just, maybe the wolves. I shook myself. There wasn't a good reason why he'd be missing unless he was dead. He was a prankster after all. The youngest son who had never really cared about the kingdom or responsibility. But even though part of me hated him for all the pranks he'd pulled on me years ago, I couldn't believe that he'd just disappear if my father was hurt. Ian was an idiot, but he was loyal and noble and... Whew. I blew out my breath and opened my eyes, reaching for the box of tissues. I had to stop thinking about what was going on at home until I could actually get back there. Crying more and allowing myself to think of the worst possible outcomes, like them both dying, was not going to get me home any faster. I blew my nose, wiped my eyes, and bit my lip. Focus on what's in front of you. I stared down at my suitcase, letting my mom's best advice sink in. One step at a time. One job at a time. One problem at a time. And what I needed to focus on right now was tying up all my loose ends, then getting away without anyone seeing me shift or fly. I went to grab another light sweater out of my drawers, then dropped it onto the bed beside my suitcase. Maybe I should just leave everything here. Just in case I'd be back sooner than expected. I may fly home and simply find Ian sitting in my parents' dining room eating dinner after getting lost for a day in the woods, and my father healing and yelling out orders from his bed. They'd allow me to return straight back here again, surely. But my heart knew the truth. I wouldn't be returning to the human realm any time soon. My brother wouldn't have texted me unless Dad's injuries were serious. And if my dad was truly as hurt as my brother said, then I wasn't coming back to the human realm in the near future. Maybe not ever. "Hey!" I called out to Narelle as she walked back into the room, zipping up my toiletry bag filled with shampoo and soaps, a worried expression on her face. "Yeah?" She glanced down at my half-empty suitcase. "Do you need help with that?" I put my hands on my hips and stared down at the mess of summer dresses and bathing suits that I would never wear again. Damn, I was going to miss the sun. Well, actually, I might leave it all for you and Tanya to share if you want. Narelle stared at me with wide, surprised eyes. Seriously? You're not taking any of your clothes? I shook my head, feeling stupid for ever thinking I should pack my clothes for the trip. I'm from a really cold country. I'll never get to wear any of this again. Narelle reached for one of my red sundresses that she'd openly coveted in the past. Thanks, Ronnie. Now that was a nickname I was going to miss. Oh! I dove under my bed and pulled out my wallet. Take the cash I have, too. I pulled out the notes and coins I'd collected and tossed them down onto my bed. Oh, I can't do that, Narelle exclaimed. Take it with you. I sighed as I ran my hands over the top of my head, pulling my hair up and into a ponytail. No. Please share it with Sarah if you want. Have a few drinks on me. Sarah was the other nanny, but she was older and a little crankier. Narelle tilted her head. Thanks, but why? I shrugged. My parents have money, so it's just not a thing. And that was the understatement of the century. You never told me that. She sounded hurt, but I couldn't stop to explain any more. I had to go. I grabbed my cell phone from where it had dropped onto the floor and slid it into my pocket. It's not important, but I have to go. Would you tell the Fredricksons that I'm sorry? She nodded, then reached for a sweater, pulling it on to cover her bare arms as the night air had turned cooler. How are you getting home? Surely you need money for a plane ticket or something. My parents will sort all that out, I explained, grabbing my friend into a hug. Thank you for everything. It's been great. Narelle chuckled in my ear and hugged me tight. You're a weird one, you know that. I smiled against her hair, then pulled back to look straight into her bright blue eyes. Yeah, I know. You take care of yourself, okay? No going back to that arsehole of an ex-boyfriend. Got it? I don't care how cute you think he is. Narelle rolled her eyes but grinned at me as well. Yes, Mom? I grabbed her against me for one more hug, her warmth and comfort making tears spring to my eyes. Stop it. It was time to go. Bye. I hurried out the bedroom door before I could change my mind. The house the family was renting was on the top of a large hill, and the back garden was completely private. No one would be able to see me shift and fly away from there. I ran out the back door and into the cool night air. I hadn't shifted in the whole 18 months I'd been here, and I could feel my dragon waking up inside of me. She was stretching her wings and shaking herself, ready to take flight for the first time in so long. And there was an awakening joy that began to infuse my blood. I glanced around, taking mental pictures of the exotic trees and the crystal blue pool. I'd enjoyed my life in the human realm. I'd learned a lot and made some great friends. But there was no question about me going home. Not in these circumstances. If Dad was hurt, or God forbid, dying, I had to go home. Now. Mom would need me. My heart began to pound faster as my shifter rose up and took over my body. My skin changed to scales, and I grew taller, bigger, larger. I blinked, and my eyes shifted as I transformed into my dragon, with keen night vision taking over from my human side. Like any other predator. I tried not to think of Ian as I launched up and into the air, flapping my wings to get higher. I flew toward the portal that marked the crossover point between realms, and even though I tried to keep the thoughts at bay, my dragon cried into the night. I'm coming. Please. Don't die before I get there, Dad. Chapter 2. Veronica. From Greece, the trip to the portal was a lot further than I'd ever flown before, but I pushed myself higher and faster. I knew where it was. I could practically feel it in the distance, like the warmth of the sun calling me home. My wings were aching, but I couldn't slow down. I pushed harder, and then I saw it. The portal. I flapped my wings higher and higher, then I relaxed and let myself soar. The release of pain was almost too good, but I focused my trajectory and passed through the portal. I was back in my own realm, and my welcome wagon was the cold rain that pelted my face. I twisted and soared toward my family home, the Winter Palace. The air grew colder, and snow began to fall. My chest was hurting from breathing the air I'd known all my life. This is why people don't leave the realm, because it's a long way and exhausting. I flew further, struggling to keep flapping my wings. But then the peaks of my father's castle came into view, stretching high into the sky. Relief sailed through me. I was almost home. I worked myself higher, using the last of my energy to get above the clouds and to rise above the freezing weather of our home. Once up there, I could breathe a little easier, and I sent a prayer of thanks to my brothers for teaching me this trick when we were younger. I coasted along, catching my breath until I was closer to the castle. Then I let myself soar down, riding the currents and wind blasts and saving my energy for the landing. My room had a huge balcony, and I aimed my landing for the stones just outside the door. I managed to land on my dragon feet, then let go of my shifter body as quickly as I could. I stumbled, then fell, hard. Ah! My hands scraped along the cobblestones, and I had no energy left to do anything but sob, right there on the ground. The door opened, and my brother Theo rushed over and wrapped a blanket around me. "Are you okay? I saw you flying and thought I'd bring you clothes." I lifted my head, my eyes hot and filled with tears. "It's good to see you, brother." Theo smiled. "Yeah, you too, dragon daughter." I groaned. "I haven't even been home 5 minutes." His chuckle was friendly as he hauled me to my feet. "Come on, let's get you warm. You hungry?" My teeth chattered as I shivered. "Always." We stepped inside, and the heat of the room hit me like a wave. Whoa! Theo shut the glass door behind us and drew me over to the fire, throwing another log into the already blazing grate. "How's Dad?" I asked, reaching out my hands to try and warm my shivering body. He walked to the door without answering my question, his frown when he glanced back telling me too much. "Get dressed and I'll meet you in the kitchen room, yeah?" The kitchen room was a little dining hall that us kids had used when growing up. I nodded, my other questions stuck in my throat. Any news about Ian? But I couldn't ask because my heart knew he hadn't been found. Theo would have led the conversation with that, I was certain. But it was more than that. That part of me that had always been a little obsessed with Ian, my oldest brother Bernie's best friend, had begun to hurt. I'd shut down any feelings I had for Ian years ago when he made it clear that I was nothing more than an annoying kid to him. But now that I'd opened the little Pandora-style box in which I'd tamped down my feelings and looked inside, a rush of feeling was pouring out once more. I raced over to my old closet, pulling out my warmest clothes. My mom liked me to wear dresses every day of the week, like a princess should. I rolled my eyes at the very thought of the rules my mom used to force upon me. But my father had supported my desire to wear pants on occasion and had made sure the tailors sewed me some of those as well as dresses. I pulled out my favourite warm black pants and several layers for my top half. A thin wool undertop and a grey dress-like pullover with long sleeves. Lastly with thick socks and flat-heeled knee-high boots. That's better. I felt like myself now, and a lot warmer at least. My pink gloves and scarf were laying on my bed, so I picked them up on my way out the door. I shivered, even in the warmth of the castle walls and my clothing. My body was going to need time to readjust to the temperature here, it seemed. Greece had been very warm indeed in comparison. I rushed along the hallway, wrapping the scarf around my neck and pulling on my gloves over my cold fingers. The kitchen room was full of my family and the cousins I'd grown up with. "Anselm! Vanya!" I called, running over to Stavrok's oldest kids and wrapping my arms around Vanya's shoulders. "It's so good to see you!" Vanya squeezed me so tight I squeaked with pain. "Oh, sorry." She stepped back. "Tell me what happened," I demanded, then stepped back to widen the circle. Jessa and Karlak stood beside me, then a hand on my shoulder had me turning around. It was Anthony. I couldn't help it. The look on his face, the sadness, the pity. My fingers curled into a fist and my arm launched out at his face. I hit Anthony hard. The sorcerer took it on the chin and reeled back. "You son of a bitch!" I screamed at him. "How could you not protect them? How?" Anselm grabbed me and hauled me back. "Veronica, stop. It's not Anthony's fault." "My dad's dying! Ian's missing!" I screamed at my cousin. "How are you not all furious?" "We are," Vanya said, crossing her arms over her chest, glaring at me. "But you don't need to take it out on Anthony." I covered my face with my hands, certain I was about to burst into tears. My eyes burned and my throat ached. My breath heaved inside my chest, but I didn't cry. I dropped my hands and stared at the sorcerer, now standing far away. "I'm sorry." Anthony rubbed his chin. "It's all good, dragon daughter." His eyes shifted into that look again, the one that said he had a vision to share, and I glanced away. "You can use me," I told him, "to find Ian." Silence descended on the group, and when I finally looked up again, my cheeks were aflame with a hot blush. My cousins were all looking at each other, confused. "Why would you? How would that?" Anthony walked toward me, straight through the middle of the circle. He didn't speak, and I quietly thanked him for not confirming my secret. Not yet, anyway. I was still struggling with it myself. "I don't know if it'll work." He spoke quietly, reaching for my hands anyway. "You weren't here when the accident happened." I still didn't know what the details were, but I lifted my chin anyway. "Try. Please." Anthony, the youngest son of Queen Marianne, nodded his head, and my eyes slid shut. There was only darkness and pain. I gasped out, and Anthony's hand squeezed my fingers tighter, as though he was going to stop me from pulling away, if that was my intention. I squeezed back. I wasn't letting go. Not until we found him. The visions came in flashes, like a lightning storm lighting up each picture for only a moment, before blackness fell again. Flash. A stony path. One I hadn't seen before, which was odd. Flash. A river. The one that led out of town and into the forest. Flash. A house. A cellar. Ian. "No!" I cried out as I gazed upon him. He looked up as though he could hear me, his bright blue eyes pinning me in place. His leg was trapped under several boulders, and his hair was matted with blood. "Ian," I whispered, then Anthony let go of my hands. The vision and sounds of the room came rushing back to me like a giant whirlwind, knocking me around. I staggered sideways, my knees giving out beneath me. Anselm grabbed me up and lifted me into his arms a moment before setting me down on the couch. "Thanks," I managed, still reeling from what I'd seen. I glanced over at Anthony, who was standing in the same place as though frozen. "Anthony!" I called out. "We need to go get him." But the sorcerer wasn't moving. "Anthony!" The doors to our sanctuary burst open, and King Eric and King Stavrok stormed in. Eric rushed over to his son. "Anthony, what happened?" Anselm explained what Anthony had done while I managed to get to my feet. I'd need a jacket if we were going out into the snow. I wasn't sure how long Ian would be able to hold out in these temperatures. "How long's he been gone?" I demanded to the closest person to me. It happened to be my brother, Theo. "Who?" he asked. Idiot. "Ian! How long's he been missing? When did the accident happen?" "Just this morning," Theo answered, going pale. "Dad and Ian went flying. They went over the forest and disappeared. Dad came back a few hours later, bleeding. His arm and leg broken. He collapsed on arrival and hasn't woken up yet." "So he's the only one who knows where Ian is," I whispered. Dad wouldn't have left Ian if he'd had any other choice. He'd used all his energy to fly back for help, then couldn't speak once he got here. Marianne, the sorceress, burst into the room. "Anthony!" She hurried over to him, and I met her gaze as she reached out to touch her son. "Anthony was helping to find Ian, but I think he's in shock or something." Marianne laid her hands on Anthony's face. "He's used too much of his magic. I'll care for him. You all need to go." "You know where my son is?" Stavrock demanded, staring at Marianne. The sorceress turned her violet eyes on me, her purple magic swirling in their depths. "No, but Veronica does." I gulped as all eyes turned on me. "He's trapped, in a cellar, under an old house." Stavrock reached out for my arm, squeezing painfully. "Where?" I tugged my arm away from him, and although I couldn't move far, he got the message and let go. "I don't know. There was a stony path I've never seen before. The creek leading out of the castle. We have to go." I stumbled toward the door. "He won't last the night." The party of family and friends followed me as we raced for the front door. "Do we fly?" Stavrock asked me. I wasn't sure. I didn't even know which way we were going. "I don't know. Dad and Ian flew, so perhaps it would be faster." Stavrock began to undress, throwing his clothes to the floor. All the men around me prepared themselves to shift. "I'm coming with you," I said, pulling off my boots. "You won't find him without me." None of the men around me argued, though I could tell they were hesitant to take me. "Come on," I said, pushing the last of my own warm clothes to the ground as the servants pulled open the front door and a blast of icy cold air hit me in the face. I stifled a sigh. This weather would take some getting used to again. Then I thought of Ian, unprotected and in danger of dying. No time to lose. "Let's go." Chapter 3. Ian. I must have fallen asleep again, because I had to be dreaming if I was hearing things now. I'd heard Veronica's voice, but there was no way she was here. "It's just your own mind, idiot," I chastised myself. I hadn't meant to fall asleep. In fact, I'd promised myself I wouldn't. But between the cold, the hunger, and the pain, I probably hadn't had much fight left in me. At least no one was here to see me failing. But why hadn't anyone found me yet? Where was Damon? I'd heard him yell out after the house had caved in on us, something about going for help. But that could have been a dream too. My whole body was shivering again, from my lips and chattering teeth to my shaking shoulders. Even my pale white, bloodless fingers seemed to be frozen. I didn't have clothes or blankets, but I'd managed to pull over some rough Hessian bags to cover my chest and leg a little. I wasn't sure it was doing much, but it was better than nothing. My leg wasn't throbbing anymore, which was kind of a relief, though part of me knew that was a bad thing. The nerves were dead, or there was no blood flow any longer. Either way, I doubted I was getting out of here alive. And even if I did, would I be looking at life without my leg? I closed my eyes and dreamed of the only thing that ever gave me any peace. Veronica. The dragon daughter herself. A princess. We'd grown up together as cousins. We'd always been told that my father Stavrock and Cass, Veronica's mom, were first cousins. She was 7 years younger than me, so when I turned 18 and she was only 11, the strange feelings I began to feel toward her made me feel sick. I pushed her away. Hard. I taunted her and played tricks on her. I was mean, even as she got older. By the time she was 16, she hated me. Unfortunately, it wasn't long after her 16th birthday that I discovered 2 things. 1, that the feelings I'd been fighting against for 5 years were the result of our fated mate bond, and 2, that she wasn't really my cousin. I'd used the blood relative excuse for years as to why finding Veronica attractive was wrong. Even though second cousins wasn't considered a close relationship, I convinced myself it was disgusting. But then, after an offhand comment from Cass, I realized that my father had adopted her as his cousin. My grandparents and Veronica's grandparents had been friends, so when they'd all died, Dad had taken Cass into the castle and cared for her as he would a younger sister. But there was no blood relationship there. Oh, fuck, it's cold. I shuddered against the frozen, hard ground, passing in and out as the bleak daylight slowly faded into night. The fact that Veronica would never know the real reason I'd teased and tortured her was my only regret right now. That, and the fact that my death was going to destroy my family. I may not be the heir to the throne or the favourite son, but my parents had loved me. Always. At least I had that. More than some people have. I began to laugh, the last words of a dying man. How ridiculous. And ironic. My own voice was the last thing I'd ever hear. I had hoped it would be my wife's, or at least one of my siblings. Or perhaps a child, if I'd ever had the chance to produce my very own heir. Being the son born 5 years after a set of triplets that were bonded like no other hadn't been the easiest thing. It had felt more like growing up as an only child. But damn, what I wouldn't give to hear Anselm's voice right now, telling me what I was doing wrong. Classic older brother, future king type of shit. I loved him, though. And I know he loved me. I dashed away a tear that dropped onto my cheek. Yeah, I was going to die down here. I stared at my leg once again, considering the option to tear my body away from the limb. Would that give me more chance of survival, or less? I closed my eyes. I was out of options. I was too weak to shift, and if I did somehow manage to get out from under this massive rock, I'd bleed out before I could crawl out of here. Ian! Ian! Veronica's voice echoed in my head again. I chuckled and lay my head back on a rock. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. So, the last thing I was going to hear was my fated mate's voice inside my head. That was better than anything else. Ian! We're coming! Just hold on! I opened my eyes and struggled to sit up. Veronica? Yes, it's me! My jaw dropped, and a strange surge of warmth filled my chest. I'm dreaming again, right? There was a huge creak and groan as some of the huge boulders around me were lifted and firelight sparked around me. The fire caused a silhouette highlight of dragon wings above me, moving the wood and boulders and stone. Dust clouds made me cough, and I covered my mouth, trying not to breathe in any more of the crap around this abandoned house. Footsteps sounded on the ground outside the house, and then a figure appeared. Veronica. It was truly her. How was this possible? She was naked and trembling, her body more beautiful than I could ever remember. Her time away had done her the world of good, it seemed. I glanced away, not wanting to look at her like that, when she had no choice about her nudity after shifting. Ian! Oh my God! She hurried down beside me, putting her hands on my face, on my arms, on my leg. You're hurt! Your leg! I groaned as my shifter began to rise inside of me, wanting to shift with my mate now in sight. "Are you in pain?" she asked, shaking a little, as though she was as freezing as I was. "Yes," I said, to cover the fact that I was really struggling now. My shifter had kept to his slumber when Veronica had been underage. When he'd seen her at Anthony's wedding, I'd barely been able to keep him together. But now, she was 19, she was beautiful, and she was here, rescuing me. Ugh! My spine arched as I fought off my dragon. Fuck! I'm going to shift! But why? How? My eyes had already shifted, and my night vision made her body even more beautiful. Fuck! I looked away, her pink nipples pebbled as if aching for my touch. You know why, Veronica. Please, help me. She stared at me for a moment, then she stood up and screamed. Anselm! Theo! Hurry! We need to get this boulder off his leg so he can shift and heal. More wings disappeared, and my big brother ran down the broken stairs and into the cellar. Ian. Oh, man, it's good to see you. My dragon settled a little, but it hovered just beneath the surface. Help. Brother, get this thing off me. Anselm studied the rock as Theo appeared. Man, he's going to bleed out if we lift this off him. He's going to die if we leave him here, Veronica snapped, all fire and brimstone. Just do it, guys. Lift that fucking stone. I'll pull him out, and he can shift before he bleeds too much. Anselm looked at me. Are you sure you can do it? You've lost a lot of blood. I clenched my jaw tight and nodded. I can, but I've only got a minute or two before I pass out. Lift the rock and run, guys. Please. More help appeared as loud wings flapped. Then my father appeared. Son. Stupid tears clogged my throat. Dad. King Stavrock, a beast of a man, and my father, the king, dropped to his knees beside me. Oh, son, I thought we'd lost you forever. He cupped my face in the most affectionate touch I'd received in years. I couldn't speak, but Veronica was there, taking charge. She put a hand on Dad's shoulder and tugged him back. Uncle, we need to hurry. Help Anselm get this rock off him. His dragon's ready to shift, and if we don't do it now, we'll lose him. Dad stood up. He can't shift, not like this. Veronica growled, her shifter as close to the surface as mine was. He's not dying down here. You got that? Lift the rock and get clear. I'll get him out and he'll shift. Dad's growl was louder and more menacing, and yet Veronica didn't budge. My shifter couldn't help but be proud of the strength of my mate. He'll kill you when he shifts, Veronica, and that's if he can. I'm not letting you do this. She put her hands on her hips and faced my father. Uncle, you have to trust me. I found him. He's still alive because of me. Just listen and do as I say. One more time. I could see my father hesitating. He believed in magic and premonitions, and although I had no idea what Veronica had done or said to get them here, obviously she believed she had the right to throw her weight around. I added fuel to the fire. Dad, please, just do what she says. I could tell he wanted to ask why, but he didn't. He just turned toward the wreckage that had fallen on my leg. Okay, boys. On 3, we lift. Once he's clear, we run and shift, get to the sky. Anselm and Theo nodded and grabbed sections of the boulder that lay pressed on my leg. Dad called out. 1, 2, 3, lift! Veronica grabbed under my arms, and the moment the rock shifted, she pulled hard, using her dragon strength to move me. I half blacked out. The pain. Oh my God, the pain. A throbbing, sharp, let me die please type of pain coursed through my body. Veronica shook my shoulders hard, and I managed to open my eyes. I was bleeding out. I could feel it. The blood gushing from my wound, draining my life force. I was so cold, my leg throbbing with agony. "Ian!" She screamed in my face, then she slapped me, hard. The pain was horrible, but woke up my shifter. She was mad at me. My mate was angry. "Get up!" she screamed. "Shift! Now!" Then she grabbed my face and kissed me hard. Her lips on mine were from a dream, but then she was gone, and the coldness of her loss blasted me in the face. "You will not die on me. You got that?" she whispered. "Now, fly with me." She ran up the stones and away from me. I saw her transform in the darkness and fly away. My dragon shifter rose up inside me faster than ever before. My wings sprouted and my body changed, the pain in my leg dulling down to a basic thud as my dragon took over my humanity. I could see everything now, my night vision kicking in. I roared, pain beginning to build inside my body as my shifter fought the injuries. "Fly!" I heard Veronica's voice in my head. "Fly!" I staggered up the steps, up the hole my family had made for me to get out of. My claws gripped the cold dirt as I panted for breath. I was seeing stars, but not the ones in the night. I was going to pass out again. A roar above my head made me look up. It was Veronica, her wings flapping hard, keeping her in place. She roared again, icy fire blasting through the night sky. God, she's magnificent. She was calling to me, and my dragon needed her more than his next breath. I jumped off the rock I stood on, launching into the sky, and followed my fated mate home. Chapter 4. Veronica. My heart pounded in my chest as though it was racing to its last beat. Ian was standing on the ground, unmoving. He'd managed to shift, but I wasn't sure he was going to make it. I need to fly back down and help him. But even as I thought the words, Ian looked up at me, his eyes blazing in the darkness of the night. Then he was flying up, toward me. Happiness filled my heart, and I started to fly home in the direction of the Winter Palace. Ian was slow, but he wasn't far behind me. I flew just fast enough that he could see me, but I wanted to give him something to aim for, so I stayed just out of his reach. When I landed on the doorstep of our castle, I shifted back quickly and pulled open the front door, yelling, "We need help! Bring supplies!" Waiting servants rushed forward with a cloak for me, and I wrapped it around my body. Fuck, I was freezing. Again. Uncle Stavrock and Anselm came running toward the front entrance, barely dressed, but at least they were wearing pants. A dragon roar met my ears, and I turned on the top step to see Ian flying in fast, but he was too low. I started waving my arms, signalling at him to land near us. He tried to comply, but he was clearly struggling. His dragon dropped out of the sky, landing badly about 100 feet down the path, rolling over and over in the snow and ice, and coming to a halt in a flurry of white. I grabbed a black cloak from our butler's arms and started running down the road. Anselm, with his longer legs, ran past me, and Stavrock was hard on my heels. Ian shifted back to human form just as we reached him. "Here!" I called out to them, throwing the cape over Ian's shoulders. Anselm quickly fastened the buttons, then Stavrock ducked down and lifted his son, heaving him up over his shoulder before running back to the castle entrance. Anselm and I gaped at the speed with which he'd scooped Ian up, shared an incredulous look, then ran after them. Stavrock bounded up the steps with ease, as if Ian weighed nothing at all. When we reached the foyer, Stavrock was already marching toward the main living room. Inside, the fire was roaring, and I rushed over to the fireplace to warm my chilled bones, while Stavrock lay Ian on a nearby couch. Ian was shaking and his teeth were chattering. I didn't think about how it would look. I ran over to the couch, jumped on top of Ian's half-naked body and lay down beside him, spreading my warm, thick cloak over the both of us to cocoon in whatever body warmth we could. "What are you?" "Shut up," I whispered, stealing my arm around his middle and pressing my flesh to his. I lay my head on his shoulder and closed my eyes, embarrassed on a level I had never experienced before. But I refused to move. He needed to warm up, and fast. Everyone was going to know about our bond now, and my cheeks flushed with heat. "Everyone, give Ian some space," Stavrock called. "Go get the healer. Everyone else out. I'll stay." There were some soft murmurings, but I didn't open my eyes until the noises faded away. I clung to Ian's shivering body until he began to quieten and his limbs soften beneath me. Then I opened my eyes, slowly. Stavrock was sitting in the large armchair next to the fireplace, staring at us, but everyone else was gone. I lifted my chin until I could see Ian's face. He had his eyes closed and his breathing was even, as though he was sleeping. But something told me he wasn't. I moved my arm, lower, toward his belly. His hand came up to grab my arm, stopping the movement. But it didn't stop me from feeling something warm and hard pressing up against the blankets. "Don't move," he whispered. "Please don't move." I relaxed again, laying my hand against his ribs. He was trembling again now, though I was pretty sure it was due to something other than cold this time. "I'll get up. You're warm now." "No," Ian snapped, a growl behind his words. I can't control it. Please, just stay where you are." My heart was pounding again, my dragon shifter recognizing the call of her mate. He wanted me. He was hurt, barely alive, but he wanted me. Stavrock stood and walked over, slowly. "Son, I can help." Ian growled a little deeper, his arm slipping around my shoulders and holding me to his chest now. "Dad, back off." Fear shot through me, but beneath the worry was a strong pulse of desire, of arousal. It was something I'd never felt before. Not to this level. I swallowed the moan that would have followed my next words. "It's okay, Uncle." "It's not okay," Stavrock whispered, still a few feet away. "Ian, why didn't you tell anyone that Veronica was your mate?" I glanced at the prince, whose jaw was set in the most determined angle I'd ever seen. "She was 11 when I first knew. She was a child. I was disgusted with myself." Stavrock made a tutting noise. "Hey, it's okay. None of this is your fault. We're both so glad, so grateful you're alive." I nodded against his neck, barely able to breathe now. My belly was quivering. His smell was just so good. "Ian, I know your dragon wants to claim her, but please let her go. Give her to me. I'll take her to have a shower, to eat. You trust me, don't you?" Stavrock's voice was soothing, but it annoyed me just the same. "It's okay," I managed to choke out. "You can go. He can keep me." I couldn't believe I was saying the words, but I was. I wanted him. And he wanted me. Surely that wasn't a terrible thing. "Veronica," Stavrock asked quietly. "Ian isn't in control, and though he doesn't want to hurt you, you're a virgin, are you not?" I buried my face in Ian's shoulder once more. "Yes? Why?" Ian's arms loosened on me, then he said in a growling tone, "Quickly, go with my dad. I need to get my dragon back under control." I lifted my head and stared at him. "You don't want me anymore?" All of my fears came crashing down on me once more, but the heat in his eyes called his words a liar. Go. He spoke louder this time. Dad, quick. Take her before I shift. Stavrock's arms came around me and lifted me off Ian's body. No! I screamed, my arms out and grasping for my mate. Ian turned his head away, his chest rising and falling as he took great big gasps of air. Stavrock set me on my feet, then pulled the same move he had with Ian. He put his shoulder in my gut and lifted me up off my feet. Uncle Stavrock! Put me down! He didn't comply. Instead, he marched me all the way upstairs and didn't put me down until we were in my bedroom. I fell back on my ass on the familiar carpet, still only wearing my cloak. Why did you do that? My mom came hurrying into the room, her face as white as a ghost. Veronica! Oh my God, Veronica! Mom, is Dad? Tears filled my eyes and squeezed my heart. I couldn't finish the question. He's alive. She rushed over to me, holding out her hands and hauling me to my feet. I fell into her arms, and she dragged me in for the biggest hug of my life. My mother. A dragon princess of her era. She held me as I squeezed her tight, then finally she pulled back and cupped my face in her hands. Are you all right? She asked. I nodded. Yes, I'm fine. Mom released me to turn and stare at Stavrock. Ian? He nodded. Thanks to Veronica, he's alive. Healing. Mom turned toward me. What? I'm sorry. I don't understand. Stavrock smiled at me and bowed his head. I'm going to go and make sure my son hasn't burned down the castle. And you can talk to your mom. The king left me alone, and somehow, strangely, I wanted to call out to him and call him a coward. Or maybe that was just how I was feeling. I didn't want to talk to Mom, or anyone else, about Ian. Tell me about Dad, I said to her, wandering over to the fireplace. How about you tell me about Ian, she said. After you've had a hot shower and dressed. I'll wait. Then we'll talk about Dad. I nodded and ran into my adjoining bathroom. She was giving me room to breathe and think. Something Mom rarely did, because she knew that I'd somehow try to get out of the conversation. But there was no getting out of this one. Ian's dragon was ready to grab me the first time he next saw me, and I wasn't sure I could stop my own dragon from wanting the same thing. I was still throbbing in areas that were vastly embarrassing to admit to. My bathroom was bigger than I remembered. There had been nothing like it in any of the places I'd visited in the human realm. The huge claw-footed bathtub called to me, but I didn't have hours to run the thing and soak. I had to get back to Mom and everyone else. I wanted to see my father. I took off the cloak, put on the hot water, and stepped into the huge shower. The pressure was fantastic, and I stood there for too long, letting the heat soak into my bones. I washed my hair with the homemade soap, and when I was finally ready to step out, I dried myself with the thick, luxurious towels my mom loved. My wardrobe was inside my bedroom, so I wrapped towels around my hair and body and made my way back to my room. Mom was sitting on the small love seat near the fireplace, her eyes closed as if in sleep. She looked utterly exhausted. I crept over to my wardrobe and pulled out a long winter dress and some tights. By the time I was finally dressed, she was awake and smiling at me. Hey, feeling better? I nodded. Definitely. I'd forgotten how cold it is here. Her smile was sad this time. Yeah. You haven't been home in over a year. I glanced away. Yeah, I know. I meant to come for Christmas, but the family I was nannying for needed me and, well, I should have come home when they'd asked me to over the holidays. But between Anthony's visions of Ian and my newfound freedom, I'd been partly afraid to come home, if I was being honest. It's okay. How's Dad? I asked, sitting down beside her. Mom sighed, deep and heavy. He's still unconscious, but Marianne will be here soon. His body is still strong, and he's healing, but we're all worried. I nodded, a lump in my throat. I didn't know what to say to make my mom feel better. But then her eyes lit up and she patted my hand. Tell me about what's going on with you and Ian. I opened my mouth to tell her the long story, then snapped it shut again. I'd been taught to be polite, but my own nature was rough and straight to the point. So I wasn't going to lie or string my mother along. I opened my mouth and told the truth. Ian is my fated mate. Chapter 5. Ian. By the time Dad got back to the lounge room, I'd managed to get to my feet and was limping around in my efforts to pace. My leg was killing me, but it was still attached to my body, so I was grateful. "When were you going to tell me?" Dad roared, striding into the room, ablaze with annoyance just as I expected. "Never," I yelled back. "I thought she was my cousin, and she was a fucking child. My plan was to make her hate me and marry someone else before she reached maturity." My dad growled at me, 2 feet away now. "Well, that didn't fucking happen, did it?" We were both huffing and puffing when the healer and Anselm entered the room. "My lord." Dad turned to the healer and gestured to him to come further into the room. "Please, come and see to my son." The healer was a man older than my father, carrying a black bag. But he was a steady man with intelligent eyes. "Lie down on the sofa, son. Let me look at you." I did what the healer said, mostly to avoid arguing any more with my dad. The healer put his hands on my head, checking for a fever, then moved down my body and to my leg. "Oh, this looks like it was very painful." I groaned as his fingers pressed into my tender flesh. When I glanced down, I could see the thigh was red raw and the flesh was indented and crisscrossed with scarring. I had begun healing, but it was still pretty bad. "It's not bleeding anymore," I managed to choke out in a semblance of humour. I thought I was going to lose it, to be honest. Anselm and Dad moved closer, sitting nearby. "How did you shift?" Anselm asked. "I thought you'd bleed out or die before your dragon could take over. I was shit scared, to be honest. But I wasn't going up against Veronica. She was ferocious." Dad turned away, but I could tell he was still listening. The healer smiled and I couldn't stop my own laugh. "Yeah, even though my life was literally hanging in the balance, no one was going up against the dragon daughter." "I did," Dad said, his voice hollow in the big room. I laid my head back on the sofa, a wave of tiredness washing over me. "Yeah, and even you backed down." Silence. "You still didn't answer the question," Anselm said. "How did you manage to shift with so much blood loss, and the pain must have been bad?" I groaned. "It was so bad I passed out." Silence again, then my big brother poked me in the arm. "Yeah? And?" I smiled at the memory. Veronica slapped me and screamed in my face. So I got up. Dad's laugh was loud, unmistakable in its meaning, but he didn't say anything. It was Anselm who had the guts to ask the question. "What's with you and the dragon daughter? I thought you hated each other." I sighed heavily, then gasped as the healer rubbed some ointment into my leg and said, "Sit up and drink this tonic. It will help you to replace some of your lost blood." I sat up and took the vial he handed me, tossing the contents back, even though it smelt like a pond. "Ick, that's vile," I said, gagging after it slid down my throat. Dad walked away, then came back a moment later with a glass of whiskey. "Here." I grabbed it and took a large swig into my mouth, swallowing the drink down with relish. "Thanks." I lay back against the pillows, and the healer walked over to my dad. "King Stavrock, I'm going to retire for the night, but if you need me at all, I'll be in the servants' quarters." The man bowed and left. I shifted on the sofa, my leg still aching like it had taken a beating. "How's Uncle Damon?" "No one said anything about him, but I assume he made it back. Told you where I was." Anselm and Dad shared a look. Then my brother said, no. Well, Damon made it back. Just. Collapsed outside of the castle, and he's still unconscious. That's why Veronica came back. Theo messaged her in the human realm, and she flew straight home. I rolled onto my side so I could face my family, the whiskey doing its job to warm my belly and relax me. "So how did you find me?" There was a bell ringing in my head, some piece of information I wasn't piecing together. Anselm slid forward to the edge of his seat and clasped his hands together. "We would never have found you, except for Veronica. Or if we had, you'd be dead. No one knew where you and Damon had gone, and with him unconscious, we didn't even know where to start looking." I blinked, then, slowly, using my arms, pushed myself up to a seated position once more. "Is that why Veronica was yelling at Dad? She was saying something about trusting her or something. I didn't understand, and I could barely think anyway by that point. Between the blood loss, the cold, and the fact my mate had found me, I was delirious." 2 servants opened the door carrying silver platters of food and drinks. They moved things around with the table so they could place the food within arm's reach, then bowed and left. "Thank you," I called out to them as they walked away, reaching for a steaming hot bowl of soup. I was starving, but shoving thick bread and heavy meat into my gut wasn't smart. I'd start with the creamy pumpkin soup and work up from there. The first spoonful was pure bliss, as was the buttered roll my brother pushed my way. I ate as much as I could, Dad and Anselm taking a thing or two, but they were obviously leaving most of it for me. "Please, eat," I said, gesturing to the platters. "There's enough for 10 men here." Dad smiled and grabbed a roll, while Anselm poured himself some wine. The fire crackled in the grate, and my belly was finally sated. I sat back with a groan and a sigh. To think, only a few hours ago, I'd truly believed my time on this planet was done. How quickly things changed. Thanks mostly to Veronica. "I really thought we'd lost you," Anselm said, looking down on the food and not meeting my gaze. "You weren't far away from losing me, I can tell you," I said. Then I glanced at Dad. "You still haven't explained what happened with Veronica. She got Anthony to hold her hands and search for you. We didn't know how or why she would help at the time. Now, of course, we do." Anselm lifted his head, his eyes wide as realization hit him. "What? You mean Veronica?" I nodded and gulped down another swig of whiskey. "Yep. The dragon daughter is my mate. I've known for 8 years. "And you didn't tell me. Tell us," Anselm demanded. "What was I going to say?" I fired back. "That my fated mate was a fucking child. And at the time I thought she was our cousin." "She is," Anselm said, his eyebrows furrowing. "Our second cousin." I glanced at Dad, who said simply, "Cass isn't my blood relative cousin. She was a family friend of the family, who I took in as my sister when her parents died. It never seemed like a title I needed to correct." I shrugged. "It's fine. But it hadn't been for a long time." "But you always seemed to hate her," Anselm went on, sounding incredulous. "You—" "I know," I groaned, running a hand through my hair. "I was mean to her, taunted her, pushed her away as much as I could." "But why?" "Because I was disgusted with myself," I yelled at them both. "Not that I was attracted to her like that. I wasn't. I was more protective, wanting to help her, shield her. But I knew what it was, the beginning of the bond. And I couldn't do it. I didn't want to feel like that. I'd never lusted after Veronica as a child. Never. But the happiness my dragon felt when she was nearby was a sure sign she was meant to be mine. So I'd run away, figuratively, putting as much space between her and me as I could. "Your love for her isn't disgusting," Dad said. "You never touched her, barely spoke to her when she was young." I made a strange choking noise. "No, I pushed her away. Hard." "Well, she's 19 now, almost 20, Anselm said, sounding strangely excited. "And she obviously knows about the bond, or she wouldn't have demanded Anthony read her like a bloody crystal ball." I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face at the image his words invoked. "She was pretty adamant, huh?" "Adamant," Dad repeated, snorting loudly. "She punched Anthony in the face." I gaped at him. "No." Anselm smirked. "Hell yes, she did. You're going to have fun putting some reins on her, brother." "Reins?" came an amused voice from the doorway. I glanced up and saw Aunt Cass watching us. She looked as lovely as ever, but much paler than usual. I smirked and held my hands up. "I didn't say it. Anselm did." Cass chuckled. "Well, you better not let my daughter hear anyone say it. She's already frothing at the mouth over how you've treated her the past 10 years. I sobered immediately. "It wasn't. I didn't." Cass put up her hand to silence me, always the queen. "You don't owe me an explanation." "Where's Veronica?" I asked, already assessing my body and trying to figure out whether I had the strength to stand up or not. I did, but it wouldn't be pretty. "She's with her father." An ominous cloud descended on the whole room. I pushed myself to my feet, my leg throbbing hard. "Take me there. Please." If Veronica's dad died, would she ever forgive me? He'd used up every last vestige of strength to get home, to get help, for me. Would she blame me? Probably. Then where would we be? Two fated mates unable to be together? Or something even worse? Chapter 6. Veronica. My father's chest rose and fell like he was simply asleep, but there was a deathly pallor to his face I'd never seen before. It scared me, seeing him like this. Weak and vulnerable. It wasn't something I was used to with my dad. The great King Damon. The king of the North. The saviour of the Winter Palace. The door opened behind me, and light footsteps on the carpet made their way to the other side of my parents' massive bed. "I'm here, Damon." "My old friend," Marianne whispered, reached out to touch my dad's hand. "Whatever has happened to you?" I looked up at Anthony's mom, the queen of the Black Mountains, and my eyes filled with tears. "Can you help him? Please?" She sat on the bed and reached out to pass her hand over my father's chest, closing her eyes as her magic rippled around her like a cloak. I waited, holding my breath. All I could hear was the thumping of my own heartbeat in my ears. The door opened again, and Mom hurried in. Ian was behind her, limping his way to a chair in the corner. My gaze was drawn to him, even though I was still furious with him. For everything. For being so mean to me in my teenage years. For not telling me the truth. For almost dying before I could wring his neck for the other 2 offences. Yet, inside my chest, my dragon settled with him in the room. Almost happy. As much as I could be in the circumstances. Fucking traitor. Marianne turned toward Mom and me. "He's tired. I don't know how else to put it. His body is healing, but I can only feel how exhausted his soul is. His mind doesn't want to wake up. Mom's sob sounded moments before she swallowed it down. I stood up and wrapped my arms around her. "It's okay, Mom. You don't have to be strong for us. Not now." My mother didn't cry in front of us. She never had. But it wasn't for lack of emotions. Her heart beat hard and strong. The strength of her love for my father had never been in question. Even when they fought, screamed the castle down some days, in their passion for a brighter, better future, we knew they loved each other. Mom nodded, and tears slid down her pale cheeks. But she didn't make another sound. Ian limped over to the bed, sitting near Dad's feet. He cleared his throat roughly, the cough sounding in the room. "Uncle Damon, I'm so sorry. It was my idea to check out the abandoned house. I had no idea it was going to collapse. It was my fault. All of this." I stared at him, my anger and pain mixing together to become a single arrow of focused fury directed straight at Ian's heart. My mate had dragged my dad into a situation that may have killed him. "Are you fucking kidding me?" I hissed at Ian, my hands tightening into fists. Ian turned bloodshot eyes toward me. "I'm sorry." I shook my head and took a step back, away from the bed. "If my dad dies, I'll never forgive you." My father was the sun and the moon for my family, for my kingdom, and, more importantly, for my mother. Ian stood up, his voice imploring. "Veronica, please." I ran from the room. I couldn't even look at him, and my dragon was so fucking angry I could shift this very minute. In fact, I turned down a hallway, running in the direction of my room, stripping off my clothes as I ran. I couldn't believe this. Theo had called me back here just in time to save my pain-in-the-ass, supposedly fated mate, only to expect me to watch my father die. No. I couldn't accept that outcome. I refused to watch him die. I wouldn't let it happen. I ran through my room to the balcony, and for the second, or was it third time that day, I shifted and took to the sky. My dragon blasted fiery ice as I flapped my wings, ascending higher into the heavens. I'd thought the year away from Ian would have calmed me, given me perspective. But it hadn't. Quite the opposite, in fact. I was as angry and confused as ever when it came to him and our connection. I flew until I was exhausted, then spiraled down, 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 until I reached the streets of the town below. I landed near my uncle and aunt's house and shifted back to human before hurrying up to their door. I knocked once, and Uncle Dmitri answered. "Veronica! Oh, God, come in before you freeze." I strode inside, and he handed me one of the long, thick cloaks that hung by the door. Everyone in our kingdom had such clothing to hand. "Who is it, Dmitri?" Aunt Sarah's voice sounded moments before she saw me. "Oh, come in. You must be freezing." She hurried me into their cosy little lounge room where the fire blazed hot. "It's beautiful in here," I said, rushing up to the fireplace to defrost. Sarah laughed. "Yeah, I'm still human. That fire burns all year round." I smiled at her, having a greater understanding now of what sort of temperatures a human was used to. "I can't believe you chose to live here. Why didn't you drag Dmitri back to your hometown?" Sarah stared at her husband with a disgusting amount of devotion. "He loves it here. Why would I have made him leave?" I rolled my eyes at the gooey look they shared, but grinned. "Indeed. Dmitri was my father's half-brother, and I'd grown up with his kids as my cousins." Thoughts of my dad immediately wiped the grin off my face. "Have you been up to the palace? Did you hear about Dad?" Dmitri sat in a large armchair, and Sarah poured tea from a pot already sitting on the nearby table, then handed me the cup. "Yes, we did. Sarah spoke up for my uncle, sitting down on the sofa opposite me. "We've been up there already, but came home a few hours ago. Is there any news?" "Well, we found Ian and brought him home," I said, my throat aching with the words. Bastard. "But Dad's still asleep."
"Ian, nice young man," Dimitri said. "He's been here for months on and off, helping your dad with renovations and plans."
I gulped. I hadn't known that. "Really? That's nice of him."
Dimitri chuckled. "It certainly is. His castle and lands are much milder than ours. I would have thought he'd prefer to stay home."
I nodded, not totally sure what to say to that. "Come, sit." Sarah patted the spot next to her. "Are you warm enough now?" I was, actually. The heat from the crackling fire in the grate had thawed me out nicely. I was also totally exhausted from the day's festivities, and then the shifting and flying. I plopped down on the couch next to my aunt, sipping the tea she'd given me. "So, what are you really doing here, girl?" Sarah asked, picking up her knitting needles. I avoided her question and asked, "What are you working on there?" "A baby blanket for Tilly. Her baby's due in a few months' time." Dimitri and Sarah had 3 children. Matilda was their daughter. "Oh, that's so good. God, I've missed a lot." Sarah and Dimitri smiled but didn't say anything. They didn't need to, though. The weight of their silence was impregnated with reproachful undertones. My guilt about being away for so long grew. "I should have come back for Christmas," I whispered, my cup clattering as I lowered it to the saucer. "Yes, you should have," Sarah said calmly. "But you're young. You're going to make mistakes."
"Just try not to repeat too many of them," Dimitri said with a smile.
I sighed and tugged the cloak tighter around myself. That was good advice. "Okay, I'll do my best." Sarah put down one of her needles and reached for my hand. "Do you want to stay here tonight? We're empty nesters now. We have beds to fill." I wiped away the stupid tear that had wended its way down my cheek. "No, I should get back. To Dad. I want to be there if—" I swallowed. "No, when he wakes up." I stood and hurried to the door. "Can I borrow the cloak? I'll bring it back tomorrow." "Of course," Sarah said, right on my heels. "What's going on, Veronica? Why did you drop in? Not that we don't love seeing you, but I'm sure it wasn't just for the tea." "Oh, nothing," I said, reaching for the door handle. "I just wanted to see family, I guess." Sarah and Dimitri had often been my safe haven when things blew up with Mom and Dad. I wasn't sure what they could do for me now, or how they'd help me with my Ian problem. I'd just come here automatically, out of habit. But it was still nice to see them. "We'll come up in the morning," Sarah said. "Unless we hear anything before then." Dimitri was standing by the door, pulling on his coat.
"I'll walk you up to the castle."
"Oh, you don't need to do that," I told him, but he ignored me. He kissed his wife on the lips and ushered me out with a wave of his hands.
"Let's go."
I smiled my goodbyes at Sarah and headed out the door. It was really late now. Almost every house we walked past had their lights off. I hadn't realized how dark and late it had gotten. "Thanks for the company," I said to my uncle as we walked up the steps to the castle entrance.
"What's going on, Veronica? Really?"
I sighed, knowing I hadn't fooled either Dimitri or Sarah. They could tell I needed advice. Where to even begin? "You and Sarah are fated mates, right?" He nodded.
"Yeah, we all are. Your mum and dad, me and Sarah, Lucian and Katerina."
"So that's expected and normal in our family?" I asked, teasing out the discussion as long as I could. Dmitri buttoned up his coat as we continued the walk up to the castle. It really was cold out tonight. I shivered, waiting for my uncle to answer. The more we walked, the more I realized how grateful I was for my uncle. I wouldn't have loved walking this whole way by myself.
"Have you found your fated mate, Veronica?" Dmitri asked suddenly. "Is that what this is about? Is he human?"
"What?" I asked.
"Did you find him while you were away on holidays? Because you know."
"Oh, no." I put out a hand and grabbed his arm to stop whatever he was about to say. "Nothing like that."
"Ah, okay."
We were almost home. My time was running out to get an external opinion. Dad said that you and Sarah didn't have the easiest road with your relationship. Dmitri broke into laughter.
"That's an understatement. Sarah had been kidnapped and injured. We had to rescue her, then convince her that it was totally normal that dragons and other realms existed."
"What happened?" I asked. "When she found out what you were?"
"She freaked out, naturally," he said with a grin. "But when her sister dragged her out into the storm and they almost died, well, I was willing to do anything to be with her after that. Even move to the human realm if that's what she preferred."
"Anything for your fated mate, huh?" I asked. My heart sank. This is what I was partly afraid of. What would I sacrifice to be with Ian? What would he sacrifice for me? Would either or both of us be asked to sacrifice too much?
"Yeah," Dmitri said with a smile.
We'd reached the top of the stairs, and he stopped and turned to face me.
"You happy for me to give you a little advice?"
I nodded. "Please do."
"Your dad will pull through. I know he will. Just be there for your mum, and don't give your dad too much shit when he finally wakes up, okay? The poor guy's been working at putting this castle back together since he was 16 years old. He's earned a rest, though I was hoping it wouldn't take a near-death experience to slow him down."
My throat clogged with sudden tears as I gulped and nodded. "Yeah, my dad, I always thought of him as being, you know—"
"Strong. Immortal."
I nodded, wiping at the tears on my cheeks.
"He's not, Veronica. He's just a man. A shifter, yes. A king, most definitely. But he'll die one day, like we all will. What's important is the time you spend together before that happens."
I inhaled sharply. He was right.
And as far as fated mate goes, it's often the last person you expect. Look at the kings. Stavrock found Lucy in a village on the other side of the Vale. Eric's fated mate was his older brother's widow. And your father's fated mate was a young virgin under Stavrock's care.
I covered my face with my hands. Oh, my God! I mean, I knew my parents' story, of course. I just hadn't thought about it quite like that. Dmitri laughed at my discomfort.
Your father was not ready for his mate. He was barely able to keep the lights on in the castle. But fate has a plan, and she's always right. You've just got to have faith.
I dropped my hands down and away. Faith, huh? My uncle grinned.
Yep, always. And speaking of fated mates, I better get back to mine.
The castle's front door opened, and our night butler gestured for me to come inside. I watched my uncle walk away, then finally returned to the warmth of my family home. Chapter 7. Ian. Auntie Cass had put everyone up, either in the guest quarters or sharing the family rooms. I was lying in a bed a few feet away from Anselm, who was snoring like a chimney. Anselm's wife had given birth to their second child not long ago, and he'd said he hadn't had a full night's sleep in forever. A foreign concept to me and every prince, everywhere. He'd passed out and was currently snoring his head off. I'd been trying to sleep, but between Anselm's snores, the pain in my leg, and Veronica's final words echoing in my mind, I was wide awake. I climbed out of bed, hit the bathroom for a long hot shower, then quietly dressed and headed out into the dark halls. Night-time in the castle was so quiet, but a skeleton staff always remained on duty. There were a few single candles lit in the hallway sconces, making it just light enough to walk easily, and I could hear footsteps that told me there were people still moving around in other parts of the castle. As I rounded a pillar on my way to the kitchen, I ran into Veronica. Literally. Oof! We bounced off each other, and she grabbed for her cloak, pulling it tightly around her body. But not before I'd caught a glimpse of what lay beneath. "What the hell, Ian?" she growled at me. I stood frozen, not wanting to upset her or rouse my dragon. She was naked beneath that cloak, and my shifter would spring to life in the most embarrassing way if I dwelled on Veronica's luscious curves. "Sorry," I managed to mumble, and tried to move past her. "No. Ian?" She stepped into my path to block me. "We need to talk." My chest tightened, and breathing suddenly became more difficult. "Okay. Where? When?" She bit her lip. Everyone else is asleep. Do you want to chat in my room?" Oh, God. Yeah, okay. How the hell was I going to control my need for my mate with her bed mere steps away? And when she was wearing only that cloak? She nodded once, stepped around me and walked off, as if she wasn't aware of the need that thrummed inside me. I took a breath and a moment, then followed in the dragon daughter's wake. Her bedroom was up 2 flights of stairs and deep into the wing containing the family bedrooms. A healer was walking toward us as we neared the king's bedroom, and Veronica rushed over to him. I sped up my steps to catch the last of their words. "There's no change, but he's not getting any worse," the healer said. "I'm going to bed for a few hours, then I'll come up and check on him again." "Thank you," I managed to choke out. Veronica turned right, grabbed the handle on an ornately decorated door, and opened it. I followed her, closing the door behind me, knowing I was now in her bedroom suite. My heart rate sped up a touch, so to distract myself, I stared around at the room. The space was beautiful, with a magnificent 4-poster bed in the centre and a roaring hot fire in the huge grate off to one side. She hurried over to the fireplace, stretching out her hands to warm herself. I wandered over to a large ruby-red seat in the corner furthest away from the Dragon Princess and sat on the cushion. "Are you all right? Where did you fly to?" Veronica stared at me, her blue eyes sparkling in the light of the room. "Nowhere, really. I just flew until I couldn't fly anymore. Then I ended up at Sarah and Dimitri's house, and my uncle walked me home." I shifted on my chair. "Dimitri is a great man. I've worked with him a lot over the years." She turned away, toward the fire, so I was shown her back. "What's wrong?" I asked, standing up to walk closer. If she wanted to talk, then I was here for her. She chuckled softly. "What's wrong? Other than the fact that my father may be dying and my fated mate has hated me my whole life." I blinked at the unexpected accusation. "I've never hated you," I growled, my dragon thrashing inside my head at the prospect that she could believe such a thing. "Never." She twirled back in a flash of both tears and anger, a Veronica duality that had always confused me. "Then why, Ian? Why? Why would you make me think that you hate me?" I couldn't stand it any longer, being apart from her. Fully aware that she might slap me in the face, I reached out for her, grabbing her body and hauling her close. She didn't hit me. In fact, her hands came up to cling to my shirt. She stared up at me, her blue eyes wide and open, perfect for me to stare down into their gorgeous depths. "I hated myself, not you," I whispered.
I hated believing that one day you'd think I'd groomed you for this day. That I'd be nice only because you were my mate, and that when you were old enough, I'd take you to my bed. I needed you to be free to make a choice, Veronica. To want me. Not because fate told you to, or because you felt like I influenced you in any way. I wanted you to have the right to choose for yourself. She gulped, her throat working as she absorbed my words. The reasons why I'd pushed Veronica away for so long were vast and numerous. But what? I asked. You have to see it from my angle. A grown man who worked out that a beautiful child would one day be his wife. It didn't feel right, and the only thing I could think to do was push you away. I shook my head. That had been a bad day. But what about now? She asked, tears glistening in her eyes. Does my presence still make you feel like it's all wrong? Like you still hate yourself? Is that why you pushed me away when I wanted to stay close to you? On the couch? Oh, my beautiful. I crushed her to me, holding her head to my chest and hugging her tight. God, no. How could you even think that? She didn't say anything, but she nuzzled into my chest as though creating a home. I let my father drag you away because otherwise I would have shifted and hurt you, maybe myself or my dad too. I could barely control my dragon around you. He wants you so bad. I rested my chin on the top of her head, then dropped a kiss on her long blonde hair. God, I don't hate you. I adore you. She lifted her head and stared up at me, then she whispered, No, you don't. You're just saying that. Oh, so that was the crux of her issue. She believed I was only saying these things because fate decreed that I should want her. Not because I actually did, but because fate was forcing me to feel it. I lifted my hands and cupped her precious face. I had dreamt of it every night since she went away. Princess Veronica, I have adored you for years. But I didn't want my feelings to force your hand. I needed you to feel as though you had a choice in our union, even though I didn't feel like I had a choice. Wanting Veronica was as natural to me as breathing. I'd never wanted any woman the way I wanted the Dragon Princess. She bit her lip, looking fragile for the first time in her whole life. I do, I think. I kissed her forehead, then the tip of her nose. Her eyes closed as I tilted her head to the side and pressed my lips to her left cheek, then her right. Her skin was as warm as sunshine. I stared down at her, my heart in my throat. This was it. The moment I'd been fixated on for years. The moment when I had the opportunity to finally tell my mate the truth. And it was more heart-wrenching, more nerve-wracking than I'd ever prepared for. I took a deep breath, and the words rushed out of me. I love everything about you. I love how stubborn you are. I love how you fight for what you think is right. I love how much you love your family, and your loyalty knows no bounds. Her lips parted as she took a breath. I wanted to kiss her, but I needed to say more. I love that you are fierce and protective. And I love that, despite how afraid you were, you punched Anthony in the face and made him read you to find where I was. You saved my life, Veronica. What other woman would fight for her man in such a way? She smiled, the edge of her luscious lips curling up in an enchanting way. Then she shrugged, like the whole life-saving thing was no big deal. I tilted her chin up with my fingertips and lowered my head, slowly moving in and kissing my mate on the lips for the very first time. The first touch was a mere butterfly kiss. Testing the waters and seeing if she was going to allow more. The next kiss was led entirely by the dragon daughter and her unexpected hunger. She grabbed my hair with 2 hands and hauled me down to crash upon her shores in a far stronger way than I'd started. I wrapped my arms around her and breathed her in. Her lips opened, and I swept my tongue in to taste her. I could have stopped at our first heated kiss if we'd simply left it there. But then she did something that pushed past the thin veil of control and choice I was trying to hang on to. She moaned, in the most seductive way possible, and my need for her took over.
Chapter 8. Veronica. My first kiss ever had been while I was on holidays with my nannying family. It had been awkward and horrible in lots of ways. My second had been over Christmas, when I'd met a boy and thought he was lovely. Again, I'd felt like a fish on dry land, totally out of my depth. My third kiss was happening now, with Ian, and it was nothing like either of the others. His lips were beautiful, somehow soft and strong at the same time. His smell was amazing. I inhaled deeply, wanting to fill my senses with his scent that rose around us. When I opened my mouth to get closer and he swept his tongue between my lips, he didn't suffocate me. He tasted me, teased me, and made me want to reciprocate. And I did. I grabbed his head and hauled him closer, thrusting my tongue into his mouth and moaning as his delicious flavour shot through me. This was right. This was how it was meant to feel, how it was meant to be. I moaned again, and Ian stilled for a moment, freezing, as though he was about to pull away. No, he wasn't doing that. He wasn't leaving me. He wasn't pulling away again. Never again. I pressed closer, fitting my body's soft curves against his hardness, my nipples tightening beneath the cloak where I was still naked. His hold around me tightened like a serpent, constricting until I could barely breathe, but I was damned if I'd ask him to let go. When I broke off our kiss to gasp, his hold loosened a touch, and he ducked his head and kissed my neck, sucking on the skin lightly while moving his hands down to my arse. He grabbed me and hauled me against his hard body. My knees gave out and I threw my head back, allowing him to hold me up as I explored his arms and back with my fingers. My cloak was uncomfortable. The thick fabric was making me hot and creating a barrier between us that I didn't want. I reached for the buttons at the throat, undid them, and pushed the material from my shoulders, allowing it to drop. Ian caught the cloak and held it to my partially clad body. Both of us were breathing hard. When he lifted his head, his gaze met mine, and his dragon shifter was right there at the surface. His irises were molten silver, making him look wild and sexy as hell. "Are you sure?" Ian bit out. "Because I'm aware you're naked apart from this scrap of material, and I'm not sure I can hold myself back any longer." "Thank God for that!" I bit out, stepping out of the circle of his arms and shoving the cloak off my body to let it drop to the floor and pool at my feet. "You've pushed me away long enough." He sucked in a breath. Chapter 9. Ian. Fucking hell. My mate was hotter than I'd ever dreamed she would be. And I'd dreamed of her too often to count in recent times. Her innocent gasps and moans made my desire soar, and the way she grabbed me like she was ready for the ride of her life made my soul sing. "Oh my, that was amazing!" She sounded excited while I was ready to pass out. I was exhausted, but in the best possible way. "Is it always like that?" she asked, stroking her nails over my chest. "No." I shook my head. "You. Damn, girl, I can barely think straight. You're amazing." I kissed the top of her hair, exulting in the feeling of happiness inside my heart. Only 6 hours ago, I had been lying in the frozen wreckage of a house, truly believing I was breathing my last. And now, I was in my mate's bed.
the mate I'd waited so long for. And I was sated and happy. Veronica lifted her head and twisted to lay on top of me, staring straight into my eyes. I feel really great. Like, really, I can't even tell you. I chuckled, running my hands up and down the smooth skin of her arms. I think I have an idea how you feel, beautiful girl. And the fact that I'd pleased her in such a way, especially for her first time, made me feel as proud as a king. She sighed happily, and I couldn't stop staring at her. She was too wonderful to believe. I lifted my hand and cupped the back of her head, running my fingers through her hair. I've dreamt about this moment for so many years. It's hard to believe this is reality. Her gaze dropped away, but not before I saw the light go out of her eyes. What's wrong? I asked, then wanted to bite my tongue. As far as she was concerned, everything. Sorry, let me rephrase that. How am I going to get you to forgive me for everything I've done in the past, dragon daughter? She dragged her gaze back up and whispered, Please don't ruin this. Her words punctured my heart, making my ribs hurt. Ruin it? How am I? Veronica rolled away from me, making me reach out to her in a panic. She wasn't leaving me. Surely. But she didn't leave. She simply shuffled back, putting herself into a cuddling position. Let's try and get some sleep. I followed her and rolled over, curling my body around hers and listening to her breathing begin to slow. She wasn't going to easily forgive me for being mean to her for so many years. That was obvious. But I had to look at the bright side of this. I was in Veronica's bed, wrapped around her, and she'd made love to me in a way that made my heart hurt with happiness. Surely this wasn't the end, but only the beginning of our lives together. I stayed awake long enough to hear her fall asleep, making cute little snuffling noises while she dreamed. And although I didn't want to miss another moment of my new life, even if it wasn't how I'd pictured it, my exhausted body finally sunk into rest. The next morning I woke up alone, but still in Veronica's bed. I would have loved to lie there and play over our night together in my mind, but my leg was absolutely killing me. I managed to get up and stagger to her bathroom. Then it was time for breakfast and some more of the healer's medicine. Or my father's whiskey. I wasn't fussy, as long as it helped. I pulled on my clothes from last night and limped into the hallway, running straight into Queen Cassandra. "Good morning, Ian." She spoke with one eyebrow raised. I froze, caught. Even at my age, I was embarrassed to be found sneaking out of a girl's room, and heat flooded my face. "Good morning, Aunt Cass." Her smirk wasn't exactly regal, but she looked just like my mom when she found something humorous. "Veronica is with her father. Breakfast is still being served in the main hall, and my husband is awake." Happiness pushed away any embarrassment I was still feeling. "Damon's awake." Cass actually grinned, then tipped her head in a regal nod. "Yes. But if you think that's going to fix everything, you're dumber than you look." Then she turned and walked away. I ran after her. "Help me, Aunt Cass." "Maybe stop calling me Aunt Cass, then," she said while we walked. I coughed to clear my throat. Cass, then?" "Or Mom," she said with a cheeky grin. "Or shall we wait for the wedding first?" I stumbled over the hall carpet runner, and Cass had to stop to wait for me to recover my footing. I couldn't help but say, "My mom always said you had Dad's spirit, which is probably why I thought you were our blood relative." Cass laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in a long while. "Because your father and I say exactly what's on our minds. Yes, well, being raised by a king and becoming a queen do have their advantages." We kept walking along the hall toward the dining room, but slower now. "What can I do, Aunt Cass? I mean, Queen." "Just Cass." "Okay, Cass. What can I do?"
This time she stopped walking and reached out for my arm, holding tight. "You can eat, then go see my husband. He was very worried about you when he woke." "Oh, God." "I'll go right now." I turned, intending to rush back the way we came, but Cass held tight to my arm. "No, you need to eat. How's your leg?" "Feels like it's on fire." "I'm okay." She sighed. "Eat first, then go see them. And as far as Veronica is concerned, well, all I can say is, try to be honest with her, Ian. She's most likely feeling confused and betrayed, and that's going to take time to get over." I inhaled sharply, hating that she was right. I'd never been honest with her. Not about our connection, nor my feelings for her. Not until the past day. "Thank you. I will." We walked together to the dining room, where my father and Eric were still eating. "Morning, son." Dad nodded at me with a cup of coffee in his hand. "How's the leg?" I grimaced as I pulled out a large chair and sat down. "It's still attached," and throbbing with the beat of my heart. I reached for the waffles and cream, my appetite huge this morning. I piled up my plate and picked up my knife and fork before I noticed the other three staring at me. "What? Worked up an appetite, son?" Dad asked, his lips quirked in amusement. I put my head down and started eating before reaching across and grabbing some crispy rashers of bacon as well. "I didn't eat at all yesterday. I'm starving." The older generation continued to eat and talk about the running of the fields and the kingdoms. I was lost in my own head, because very soon I was going to have to confront my mate and her father, who'd almost died trying to save my life. Chapter 10. Veronica. I gripped my father's hand, determined to make up the ground I'd lost. "Dad, I need to apologize for running away last year and for not coming home for Christmas. That was so wrong." He still lay in his huge bed, his face pale and his eyes looking haunted and dark as he stared at me. He looked nothing like my father, the strong King Damon I remembered. But when he smiled, it was like the sunshine peeking around dark clouds, and my heart lifted at the sight. "Sweetheart, you don't need to apologize for leaving. You did what you needed to do, as you always have. As for Christmas, yes, that wasn't the right choice as far as we were concerned, but I have to assume there was a good reason for staying away." His question hung in the air, and my guilt consumed me like a ravenous animal, snapping at my flesh. No. I mean, I had to work. But really, I was just being selfish." Dad squeezed my hand. "I don't believe you, sweetheart. You're not selfish. You may be the dragon daughter whose fierce temper everyone fears, but I have to tell you, it's always given me so much joy and pride to have sired the daughter that intimidates everyone else. And you, the baby, too." Hot tears blurred my vision at his kind words, and I blinked them away. The pain of guilt constricting my chest had gotten worse since speaking to my father, not better. It felt like my heart was about to break. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry." "Oh, baby, come here. Come here." He pulled me further onto the large bed, and I curled up and put my head on his lap, like I used to when I was little. He stroked my hair and sighed. "When did you grow up, huh? I feel like I blinked and I missed it." I giggled against his leg. "Hardly, Dad. You've rebuilt your whole kingdom and taken us along for the ride." For a king who had more responsibilities than most, my dad had been in our lives more than any other father I knew. He'd read us stories at bedtime, taken us walking in the fields, and on trips to visit with the tenants. Anselm and his sisters had been treated like royalty since the day they were born, but often I'd felt like a regular child growing up in the Northern Kingdom. Special and loved, but not royal. Not until I turned 13 and my mother decided it was time for me to learn the responsibilities of my position as a dragon princess. That was when the world had changed for me. "Sometimes I wish I could go back there," I whispered, not speaking specifically to my dad, but he heard me anyway.
"Back where?"
"Back to the fields when I was 10 years old. Riding the sleigh, taming the horses, running through the snow. Enjoying our lands in the simplest and most pleasurable of ways." My dad's sigh was heavy.
"You really were made for this kingdom, weren't you, my daughter? Part of me knew it was the wrong choice to force you inside to learn the more traditional female skills. But—"
He sighed again, then chuckled.
"Whatever husband you choose will have to like the outdoors. Be able to get his hands dirty, put up with your temper."
"Dad," I complained, whacking his leg beneath the bedcovers.
"And speaking of Ian—"
I sat up and twirled around, sitting cross-legged on the massive bed and staring at my dad with shock. "What about Ian?" How had he known? My dad's face reflected amusement, a slash of welcome colour highlighting his still too pale cheeks.
"You think I didn't know?"
I rolled my eyes. Mom. He'd only been conscious a few hours, and she'd already caught him up on all the news. Dad shifted a little, adjusting the pillows behind him and sitting up straighter in bed.
"No, it was Ian, actually."
My jaw dropped. "Sorry, what? When? He hasn't seen you yet since you woke up." Had my father seriously found out who my fated mate was before I had?
"He told me just before the accident."
Anger flashed through me. Why am I the last person to know everything? Dad reached out and touched my hand, as if sensing my distress and wanting to reduce it.
"Hey, sick man over here."
I took a deep breath to calm myself. "Yes, you're right. Okay. Sorry." I would have something to say to that damn annoying mate of mine about this, and he wouldn't like it, I was sure.
Plus, if I might correct you, I believe you already knew he was your mate. Didn't you? Before you went away.
I looked down at my fingers, clutched around my father's weather-worn, strong, capable hand. I nodded. I couldn't deny it. Yes. Anthony accidentally gave me a vision about my future.
"And you didn't want to know the truth," Dad prompted. "You didn't think to tell us, obviously."
"I didn't want it to be true," I cried. Ian! Ian
had always been mean to you, I know."
Dad let out a small groan as he moved his leg. "He wasn't just mean to me," I said, snorting in exasperation. "He made me feel like I had the plague or something. I was already the youngest of all the cousins, and he had me thinking he hated me." Dad leaned back against the bed's headboard.
"To be honest, I feel sorry for him."
"You what?" I gasped out, blinking at my father. Did I hear that right?
"Well, put yourself in his shoes," Dad said, then rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, strike that. For a second I forgot who I was talking to."
"Hey!" I put my hands on my hips and glared at my sick father, not an easy feat while still sitting cross-legged on his bed. Dad chuckled, then coughed hard. I quickly leaned across to grab his glass of water from beside the bed and handed it to him. "You okay?" He took a sip, then nodded.
"Yes."
I waited, then asked, "Are you going to repeat that insult?" Dad laughed and this time managed it without coughing.
"Oh, sweetheart, you've never been good at putting yourself in the shoes of anyone else. You're too hot-headed. And right now, all you're focusing on is how hard Ian was on you for all those years. But did he ever hurt you? Really? Or was it more about a bruised ego?"
I crossed my arms over my chest and pouted. A bruised ego? I wasn't sure I wanted to answer that question.
Okay then, Veronica. Prove to me that I'm wrong. Put yourself in Ian's shoes. You're almost 10 years older than your mate, and once you reach maturity, you turn around one day and gaze upon an 11-year-old child, a boy in your case, and realize he's your mate. How do you feel?
I opened my mouth to snap out a response, only to realize that I really had no idea how I'd feel in that situation. I could only guess. Shock and maybe disbelief. Probably frustration at the stupidity of fate making such a choice for me. But would I push the kid away by being constantly mean to him and making him feel like I hated him? I simply wasn't sure. I was the youngest of 3 siblings and the youngest of all the cousins. I'd spent my life racing to catch up. I couldn't imagine what it would be like to have to wait for such a thing. I realized my dad was studying me intently, and I shrugged, uncomfortable with his questions.
I want you to think about it, baby girl, okay? Because Ian is a good man, a son to be proud of. He suits you well.
I didn't know what to say. In fact, my throat was clogged up and frozen in a most annoying way.
Ian, my dad said,
but in a greeting type of way. I frowned and turned my head, following his gaze to the door. Ian leaned against the doorframe, watching us.
Come in, Dad said, gesturing him over. It is so good to see you alive and well. I apologize, Ian. I've failed you.
What? My dad had failed Ian? How? I frowned at my father, then turned towards my mate. My beautiful man. God, he was divine to look at. Even confused and angry and hurt as I was right now, my heart soared upon seeing him.
No, Uncle Damon. No, you didn't.
Ian limped over to the bed, his face contorting. He was obviously still in pain. I watched him move gingerly, and a pang of guilt assailed me. Yesterday, he'd almost died. And I'd dragged him to bed last night to find out if the bond between us was as strong as I feared. It was, and it looked like Ian was paying the price today.
You would have died, Dad said, choking out the words. Because of me. I was the one who wanted to see that house, Ian said, glancing at me as if to gauge my reaction to his words.
Dad was silent for a moment, then shook his head.
You two. No, Ian. You don't need to cover for me. We both know I was the one who wanted to check out that wreck. It was my fault we were there, and that you went down to the cellar and got hurt. And if my daughter hadn't come home and used whatever mating magic you two have to find you, you'd be dead.
Ian's surprise at my dad's admission was obvious in his widening eyes. No doubt I sported the same shocked expression. It was Dad's fault. I managed a small smile at Ian. You told me it was your fault. But it wasn't. He shrugged, seeming slightly embarrassed.
It was no one's fault. It was simply an accident. But if King Damon had died because he tried to fly home to save me, that would have been my fault.
Tears threatened my composure again at the thought that I could have lost both of them. I slid off the bed and wandered over to the blazing fireplace to stare down into the flames. So Ian was a man of secrets, and he'd been covering for my dad. Clearly, he loved my father, and from what he'd said, he loved me too.
I don't remember getting home, Dad said, interrupting my musings about Ian. How close did I get before passing out? Close enough, Ian answered, a diplomatic answer. Your people set off the alarm, and everything after that was a chain reaction. Theo sending for Veronica. Everyone trying to track me down.
I turned to face them, my throat hurting from the effort to hold back my tears. You're both alive and home, which is all that matters. I'll leave you both if you don't mind. I have to go and speak to someone. I had this intense urge to see Anthony, and I wasn't sure why.
I'll come with you, Ian said, but I waved my hand at him.
No, please stay with my dad and visit. I won't be long.
He nodded at me, not trying to change my mind. I'd spent my life fighting for my place in this family and in the larger group. Now it seemed that all I'd managed to gain for myself was a reputation as a selfish child who couldn't put myself in anyone else's shoes and wouldn't even forgive her own mate. The truth hurts, though, doesn't it? I managed to smile to my father and Ian, and then I ran. Not simply down the castle hallways away from my father's suite. I was also running away from my past, away from my possible future, and away from the pain that all of my choices in life had brought me so far. Chapter 11. Veronica. While Ian stayed to chat with my father, I searched the castle to find my magical friends. I found Marianne and Anthony chatting in the library, drinking tea and munching on chocolate chip cookies. They looked so relaxed I was loath to interrupt, but I really needed to speak with Anthony. I directed my gaze at him. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Marianne raised an eyebrow at me. "Are my services no longer good enough?" Oh, crap. "Oh, no, I'm sorry, Auntie Marianne. It's just that Anthony, you know." I waved my hands around, not sure how to explain why I needed him and not her. This time she raised both eyebrows. "You mean you're here to apologize again for breaking my son's nose? That wasn't very ladylike, Veronica." I scoffed. "I've never been very ladylike, Marianne." Then I glanced at the prince I'd always considered a brother. "But I am sorry, Anthony. Truly. My temper. I'm sorry. I should never have done it. I was out of my head with worry." Anthony stood up and smiled at me. "I'm fine, Veronica. What do you need?" I bit my lip, chewing on the flesh while I structured my question in my mind. "I don't really know. I just had this insane need to come see you." He chuckled softly. "I'm already happily married, dragon daughter. Sorry." "Oh, not like that." I whacked him gently on the chest. Marianne wasn't leaving, and when I turned to her, she stayed in her seat. "I'm not leaving you alone with my son again, Missy. You punched him, then sucked all the magic out of him. It's taken me all day to get him right again." I gulped and apologized again. "I'm sorry about that." "No, I'm not," Anthony said, glaring at his mother before turning back to me. "You found Ian. Saved his life. I would happily sacrifice my health for his." Marianne huffed, but I didn't think it was because she disagreed. She was probably annoyed I hadn't asked her for help. I looked up at Anthony, who had always been at least 6 inches taller than me, and said the first thing that came into my head. "Would you do the premonition for me? Again? Show me my future?" Anthony shoved his hands in his pockets, as though he was afraid to touch me. I didn't blame him. "Why, Veronica? I mean, I've shown you the future. What I've seen, anyway. And I can't always control what I show to others. It doesn't work like that." I inhaled sharply, a twang in my gut making me desire to see it once more. I feel like I've made some mistakes since then. Going to the human realm. Ian being hurt. If it's at all possible, I'd like to see it again, please. I glanced at Marianne, my fear growing. Or am I wrong? Couldn't my fate change? Or is what is seen set in stone? Marianne shook her head and gestured to me. "Come, Veronica, sit. My son can't give you more of his magic today. He's still recovering. But I'll help you." I rushed into the seat Anthony had been occupying. "Oh, thank you." Marianne turned to face me, that special purple magic swirling in her eyes. "I can't guarantee I'll see the same thing as Anthony showed you. I don't have any control over my visions." I nodded, holding out both hands. "No problem, of course. I don't mind." Whatever she could share with me would be fine. I'd already relived that first vision so many times. Marianne took my hands, and there was a flash of black, then a cracking, like a tree breaking apart and falling. Despite the shock of the sound, I didn't let go. Instead, I waited for the image to come. I was here, in my room in the castle, looking out the window. Very similar to the other vision. But I wasn't pregnant, I wasn't smiling, and there wasn't a ring on my finger anymore. There were footsteps like before, and I waited with my heart in my throat to see who would walk in the door. Last time it was Ian. Surely he'd come this time too. But when the door opened and a man walked in, it was Anselm, in full mourning black, carrying a bouquet of white flowers and staring at me with pity in his expression. "No!" I shouted, yanking my hands out of Marianne's grip and jumping to my feet. "No, that's not right. It can't be." Marianne's face was a cloud of misery. "I'm sorry, love, but you were right that your fate isn't set in stone. Every decision we make affects it somehow." "When was that?" I demanded to know. "Anthony's vision was in the future, years into the future." Marianne shook her head slowly. "My visions are, more often than not, images of the near future." My breath caught in my chest, making the pounding of my heart reverberate in my ears. "How soon? How near, Marianne?" "Days," she whispered. "Hours, even." I took off running down the hallway, screaming to one of the guards that stood in the halls. "Call the healer! Now! Get everyone! Go!" 2 of the men took off running in the opposite direction to me. I lifted my skirts and ran faster. I may have fought against my future, afraid of what fate had in store for me. But they would not take Ian away from me. They would not. I wouldn't allow it. I'd gotten my nickname through sheer grit and determination, and I'd go up against the fates themselves if they tried to hurt my mate again. I burst through the doors to my parents' bedroom just in time to see Ian collapse beside my father's bed. "Veronica, get help!" Dad called out as I hurled myself across the room and crawled on my knees to my mate's side. "Ian's sick." "He's not sick, Dad," I said, ice racing through my veins as I pressed my head to his chest and heard nothing. "He's dying." I tilted his head back, checked his airway, then hit him over the sternum, hard. "What are you doing?" Dad asked, throwing back the covers and sliding closer. I put my head to his chest. Nothing. "I'm starting CPR." I put my hands into the compression position and set them to his chest. "I learned how to do it when I went to the human realm." 1, 2, 3. I pinched his nose and breathed air into his mouth. Once, twice. Then I was up again, doing compressions. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Sweat rolled down my face. "Who taught you?" "I did a course." I panted, getting tired already. But Ian was much bigger and stronger than me, and I needed to push hard. The family had kids. They swam. They wanted me to know how to revive them if they drowned. "Veronica." I could hear the awe in his voice. "Dad, stop, please. I can teach everyone else too, but later." No one in my realm knew any type of CPR. Shifters were strong and healthy. And we didn't swim, let alone drown. Our whole realm was too cold, and especially so up in the northern kingdom where I lived. Every lake was frozen over, practically 10 months a year. Guards came rushing in, joined by Anthony and my brother Theo. "What can we do?" I glanced up, not wanting to stop, but I knew I couldn't keep up this pace.
I need some help. Come kneel beside me, Theo. I'll show you what to do. I leaned forward, breathing into Ian's mouth. My mind was so clear I could hardly believe how calm I was, my body fueled by panic and adrenaline. Put your hands like this, I said, showing Theo the posture. Then I want you to push down 30 times, and I'll breathe into him. I counted as Theo pumped. 29, 30. Then I leaned down and breathed into him again. What's this doing? Anthony asked, coming to kneel down with us. It's keeping his body alive until we can get help, I said. We're pumping his heart for him and pushing oxygen into his lungs. I glanced over at Anthony, who was shoulder to shoulder with me. You ready to take over from Theo? 1, 2, 3, take over. Theo jumped out of the way, and Anthony hopped straight into his spot. I got my breath back, then corrected his posture. Get up a bit more, right over him. Yeah, like that. 30. I pinched Ian's nose and breathed into his mouth. More people burst into the room, including the healer and Marianne. I stared at the healer. Please, you have to help him. The healer rushed over. What happened? Dad called out. We were talking. Ian went pale and said his leg was killing him. Then he went down. 30, Anthony called out. I breathed into him, once, twice. The healer lifted Ian's pants leg, and I stared down at the mangled red mess. It didn't look like that last night. It had been damaged, but healing, not red or swollen. Poison, the healer whispered, opening his bag and rummaging through. Anthony had stopped pumping when Ian's leg was revealed, and I yelled at him. Keep going! I gave my mate 2 breaths, and the sorcerer kept going again with compressions. I was starting to shake. Please hurry! The healer pulled out a knife and rifled through his bag until he found a vial of white fluid. I have to cut his leg open and dump this in. But if his heart isn't pumping, he won't come back. I staggered to my feet, all my hope leaching away. If only we had the defibrillator paddles from the human realm. An idea began to form. Marianne, I need you to shock Ian's heart. The sorceress hurried over to us. Ian's lips were pale. Stavrock came running in, barely dressed. Where's my... No. I ran in front of the huge king. I have a plan, but you need to get everyone back. Please, help me. The king didn't hesitate. He simply nodded and went into damage control. Okay, everyone out. Except Marianne and the healer, I said. Stavrock gathered everyone up, even Anthony, and forced them all out of the room. I continued CPR, even though my arms were shaking and I clinked teeth with Ian while trying to give him mouth-to-mouth. Healer, do the leg thing. Quickly. Don't worry about the scarring. The healer did what I asked, slicing open Ian's leg and pouring the white liquid on his leg. There was very little blood, and what was still there seeped out of the wound, hissing and bubbling when it mixed with the medicine. I'm glad he's passed out, the healer said. That would hurt like nothing else. He's not passed out, I snapped at him. He's legally dead. Now go. The healer grabbed his bag and left. I did one more round of CPR, breathed into his mouth twice, then shuffled back on my hands like a crab. Marianne was hovering, her long dark hair falling down her back. What do you need me to do, Veronica? I need you to shock his heart with electricity. Like a lightning bolt. Marianne stared at me like I was crazy. I could kill him. He's already dead, I cried, pointing at Ian's prone body. Please. The sorceress rubbed her hands together, the crackle and spark of her powers caressing her fingertips. She was waiting too long. Do it, I screamed, and Marianne dropped to her knees and set her hands on Ian's chest. Chapter 12. Ian. There was nothing but blackness, cold, calm, which was nice in a strange way. I was at peace. No more fated mate who despised me for the things that had happened in the past. No more responsibilities, stress, or pain. My body didn't hurt anymore, finally, and that was good. That was very good. It was hard to think back to the time before the pain, but I was going to miss everyone. My mom, my dad, my Veronica. She would be better off without me. They were all better off without me. I was only the spare son. Anselm was the heir, and my mate had never wanted me. White light exploded inside my mind and behind my eyelids. Oh God, it was agony. Stop. Please stop. Let me go back to the place of peace, the place without pain. Then I was dragged back into my pain-riddled body, my leg on fucking fire. I groaned and rolled onto my side, drawing my legs up toward my chest. Oh, God! You're alive! You're back! Veronica was practically on top of me, leaning over me, then pressing her body to my side and gripping me in a tight embrace. Oh my God, I thought I'd lost you! Her presence settled the strange angst inside my chest, but the pain was still there, hurting deep inside me. I moaned, unable to hold it in. What happened? You died, she yelled, whacking me in the side. She was angry with me, again. I didn't know why, and there was an answering anger building inside me now. Even my dragon was furious. I groaned, and doors banged open around us. People came rushing in around me, touching me, prodding at my hurting body. Leave me alone. Get him up on the bed, Dad said, and I was scooped up and placed on King Damon's bed. The pain in my leg burned like my whole limb was on fire. What did you put on my leg? It feels so much worse than it did before. The healer pushed everyone out of the way to set his hands on me. They were cold against the heat of my skin. I had to treat the poison, but it's working. Wait, what? What poison? The infection, the healer said in a soft voice. Your wound turned septic. It was killing you from the inside out. It did kill you, but we brought you back. That was Veronica, shouting again. She seemed super upset about the almost dying thing, especially given she didn't seem to like me. Do you need something for the pain? The healer asked. I nodded. Hell yes. My head was throbbing too. I looked down at my leg to check it wasn't actually on fire. It wasn't, but it felt like it. The healer mixed up a drink and offered it to me. I managed to lift my head long enough to gulp down something that tasted like pond water, then lay down again. What the hell happened? I gasped out. King Damon was sitting on his bed, but everyone else was standing around the bedroom staring at me. How embarrassing. The medicine began to work, and my body started to relax, the raging fire dying down to a slow burn. I managed to roll onto my back and half sit up against the headboard. Everyone was there. Marianne, Damon, Anthony, my father and Veronica, even Cass. 2 kings, 2 queens, and their offspring. This is an impressive audience, I managed. For a prince who will never be king. It's a bit much, don't you think? Veronica glared at me, not liking my joke, obviously. Hey, dragon daughter, lighten up. I smiled at her. You should leave. I'm not worth the royal procession. If she'd been in her shifter form, I think I may have seen smoke blow from her nostrils. You ungrateful turd! I gaped at her, then laughed. Oh, God. This is what I came back to life for, to get more shit from my mate, just as I had for the past decade. Seriously, I growled at her.
I'm ungrateful. I crawled back from death itself, and this is the shit I have to deal with. But what's changed, right? You still hate me. Obviously, you always will."
Her mouth dropped open, and her eyes shifted, the irises transforming into the shape of her dragon. Then she turned and ran out of the room. I felt nothing watching her go. Actually, that wasn't quite right. I did feel something. I was glad. She should go. She didn't love me. She didn't want me. King Damon shifted further onto the bed, his bed, and shook his head at me.
"Oh, mate, you screwed that one up."
I wanted to get up, to leave. I didn't want to be there. But even the slightest movement hurt, so I just lay there and grumbled.
"I don't care," I said truthfully, rolling into the fetal position and closing my eyes. "Nothing's ever going to change with Veronica. I should have stayed dead."
Then she could have married someone else, been happy, without me.
"Ian!"
My father's shocked disapproval was clear in his tone, but I couldn't shake the black cloud descending over me. I didn't bother to open my eyes or respond when he added,
"Don't say things like that."
I should be dead. I wish I was dead. The voices around me changed, becoming muffled. I couldn't make them out. They were murmuring about me, about where to put me, how to deal with me. I didn't care. The depression swallowed me up and I burrowed under the covers. They should have just left me in that abandoned house and let me die. Veronica. I was fuming. He'd rather be dead than be with me. I ran straight back to my bedroom, picked up the nearest thing, which happened to be a vase by the door, and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall hard, shattering into a million pieces. Just like my heart. Gah! I clenched my hands into tight fists and screamed out loud. "You fucking bastard! I knew it! I knew I couldn't trust you!" I was too angry to cry, so I stomped around the room, throwing anything I could find. Until finally, there was nothing left to break, and I fell to the ground in a pile of sorrow. I finally cried, but I was strangely numb, cold. When there was a knock at my door, I ignored it. I didn't even know who it was. The whole house was crawling with family and friends, so it could have been anyone. I didn't care. I needed time out to try and calm down. The next knock was followed by the door opening, then a low whistle.
"I thought I heard the breaking of expensive things."
I didn't look up, but I rested my face on my knees. Mom doesn't put expensive things in here. She knows they're not safe. King Stavrock walked into my room, then sat down on the floor beside me, resting his back against the bed.
"How are you doing, dragon daughter?"
I sniffed. Despite the broken bits, I'm fine. I was always fine. Stavrock nudged me with his shoulder.
"You can't take the things that Ian said when he woke up just now to heart. He didn't mean any of it."
"How do you know? You didn't even know I was his fated mate. He didn't tell you. He's ashamed of me. Embarrassed I'm so, well, me." I couldn't help the fire that burned inside of me. I'd tried to quiet my fiery nature. I'd done yoga and meditation and tried to channel my mother's calm, but it never worked.
"Hate to tell you this, kid, but you are awesome. You're so much like your mother."
I turned my head to look at the big king, still resting my cheek on my knees. "What are you talking about, Uncle Stavrock? My mother is the perfect queen. Calm. Ladylike." My uncle laughed so hard I sat up and straightened out my legs to mimic his posture. "What are you laughing at?"
"Oh," Stavrock chuckled, "just the way time changes things. Who we all were 30 years ago is very different to how we are now."
I stared up at him, remembering a story my cousins had shared with me a few years ago. "You mean like how you killed the King of the Black Mountains to save Aunt Lucy?" Stavrock sobered, but nodded slowly.
"Yes, just like that. I may be old now, Veronica, but I wasn't always. I loved, I fought, I almost died. I made mistakes, a lot of them, but it all came out well in the end."
I waited, but I wasn't patient on my best day, and this wasn't that day. "And my mom? What was she like?" He rested his head back against the bed.
"She was a true dragon princess. Strong, opinionated, beautiful."
I smiled. "She still is."
"But she wasn't the calm lady you know now," he said. "She wouldn't settle for an ordinary life. She wanted to see the kingdom to the north when no one travelled here back then. This place was in ruins, but your mom, she wasn't afraid. She fought the wolves to keep the children safe. She pulled your father back from the brink of death. She was stronger than you know, Veronica. She was just like you, but you have the advantage of growing up here, in the toughest kingdom in our realm. You're your father's daughter, but trust me, Queen Cass was a rebel in her day too. Very feisty. I could barely keep her in line."
I chuckled. "Mom, feisty? And needing to be kept in line?" That didn't sound like her.
"Exactly."
He nudged me again.
"Stop being so hard on yourself. You're young, and yes, you're a hothead. But that's the dragon royal blood. My children have a human mother. Eric and Marianne are a mix as well. But you're a dragon princess through and through."
I gulped. "But Mom isn't actually your cousin." He smiled.
"Her parents were my mom's best friends and full-blooded dragons, so trust me. They had the strength of our ancestors in their bones, and they passed it on to Cass. And through her, to you."
I sighed and rested my head on my knees again. "So, I'll be this out of control with my emotions forever, huh?"
"Hey, are you forgetting the first part of this conversation? I'm old and tired. Your mum is calm and queenly, and your poor dad, well, he barely managed the flight home after an injury."
"That's not making me feel better." Stavrock chuckled again.
"Dragon daughter, you are in your physical prime. You're young and healthy. Enjoy the fire that flows through your blood instead of fighting it, and please, give my son a second chance."
I pressed my lips together in a flat line. Stavrock shook his head before hauling himself to his feet. "Are you leaving?" I asked. He nodded.
"Yes, I need to fly home for a few days and update Lucy. She doesn't like to be left out of the loop for long."
I jumped to my feet far more quickly than he had. The difference in our physical ability is obvious in that one movement. "Why should I give Ian a second chance, Uncle Stavrock? After everything he's said and done. I don't want to be with someone who doesn't like me or want me around." He shrugged.
"Because ignoring the fated mate bond is fatal to all that are involved, Veronica. You won't find another who will love you the way Ian does and can. And I promise you, my son loves you dearly."
I crossed my arms over my chest, still finding it hard to believe him. The huge king walked to the door and opened it before turning back.
"Veronica, you don't have to forgive him. Hell, you can punish Ian for the rest of your lives if you choose to, but before you make a decision like that, one that will bring great sadness to both of you, I ask that you give him a second chance to prove himself. You won't be sorry."
Then King Stavrock left the room, taking all my anger with him and leaving me with nothing but my own sadness. Chapter 13. Ian. The pain in my head wouldn't stop, and the darkness of my thoughts were downright black as midnight. But I'd scared Veronica off, again, and I had no lifeline to drag me to safety. No rope. Nothing but darkness that felt soul-deep.
"Ian, please, talk to me," King Damon said again, gently shaking my shoulder.
I shrugged him off and turned away. The healer had come to check on me again, and I'd wanted to outright attack the man.
"He's alive, my lord," the healer had told Damon.
But the poison in the wound, it had already spread through his blood. His skin's burning with it. All over. I groaned. They should have left me dead. A little niggle in the back of my mind said maybe that's why I was feeling so dark and hopeless. Maybe the poison had spread to my mind too. It was so tiring to think at all.
"What's there to do?" Damon asked. "We have to fix this and help him, somehow."
"I don't know what to suggest, my king. I'm sorry." The healer left, and I stayed curled up in my ball of hate and pain.
"Ian, you have to fight this."
"I want to go home," I managed to groan. My own bed. My father's kingdom. If I was going to die, I wanted to die in the same place I'd been born.
"You can," Damon said. "When you're strong enough to travel. Could you shift? That might help detox the poison from your system."
I searched inside for my dragon, but he was curled up, angry and half dead. I shook my head.
"No way."
I wasn't sure my dragon would survive a shift.
"Ian, you need to get up. Have a shower. Can you stand?"
I lifted my head, a hint of humour lighting me up for just an instant.
"Can you?"
Damon swung his legs off the side of the bed and got up, swaying like a tree in a strong wind. I laughed, though there was slight bitterness in the sound.
"Sit down before you fall down."
Damon picked up a pillow and tossed it at my head. It hit me, and I batted the fluffy insult away.
"Fuck off." "What the hell is wrong with you?" Damon yelled at me. "You're young. You're a prince. You've waited 10 years for your fated mate, and now that you finally have a chance with her, you're giving up."
Finally, I uncurled and managed to push myself up enough so that my belly ached with the muscle strain.
"I don't have a chance with Veronica. She hates me."
Damon laughed, the noise a stark contrast to the voice in my head.
"She doesn't hate you, Ian. Quite the opposite. You're a fool if you think that."
"You're wrong," I spat back. "She won't forgive me for what I had to do to her when she was a kid to keep her at a distance.
She thinks I'm an asshole."
Damon's dragon flashed in his eyes, and my breath caught in my throat at the sudden ratcheting up of tension in the room.
"My daughter is the best thing that ever happened to you, you sorry son of a bitch. She's dragged you back from the brink of death. Twice. And if, after that, you're not willing to even try to live, then damn you, Ian. Damn you to hell."
Damon stalked out of the room as regally as his injured body would allow him. I fell back against the pillows, my exhaustion bone deep. A soft knock at the door made me turn my head, and there she was, my mate. Veronica stepped into the room, twisting her fingers around like she was nervous, but a tentative smile played on her lips. "And I thought I had a temper." I snorted.
"We're all a product of our parents, I suppose."
"You still hate me," she whispered. I shook my head, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths.
"I told you before. I've hated myself, Veronica, but never you."
She took another step forward. "I spoke to the healer. He said the poison spread." I ran a hand through my hair, trying hard not to scream.
"I can't. My thoughts. My God, Veronica, I can't. This lethargy, this deep depressive state where I can't seem to pull myself free. Hell, this isn't me."
I finished more quietly.
I think it's the poison. It has too strong a hold. I can't seem to shake it off. She rushed the last few steps to the bed. There's this place Mum and Dad took us as kids. There are hot springs, and Mum always said there were healing powers in the waters. Hot springs? I scoffed half-heartedly. Here? In the north? The Winter Palace? She nodded, her eyes flashing with the wrath of her dragon being challenged. You know, if you don't pull yourself together, I'll just fly back to the human realm for another couple of years. It was fun. Dancing and working and sunbathing on the beaches there. I have years before my unrequited mate instincts begin to drive me crazy. I narrowed my eyes at the dragon daughter, opened my mouth, then shut it again before I spat something nasty at her. She was right. I was the one fast approaching the age where I would start going crazy, needing my mate. She wasn't. She was young. She'd run from me before. She'd do it again. You want to leave me? She widened her eyes and gave me an annoyed look. No. Are you going to come with me to the hot springs or not? I rolled my eyes and groaned. You don't give up, do you? Nope. She grabbed the bed covers and dragged them off me. Now get up, before you die, again. She stormed back to the door and then flicked her hair over her shoulder, glaring back at me. Or would you rather that, Ian? Die? Then I can hook up with any man I want. No mate, just humans, maybe some dragon shifters too. I was on my feet before I'd made the decision to follow her. Over my dead body, I growled out. No one else would touch my mate. Mine. I was her first. I'd be her only. That's kinda the idea, she said. You coming? Then she left. I was breathing like an old man, but my dragon had woken at the thought of another man touching Veronica, and the shifter side of me lent enough strength to my limbs to follow her. The pain was manageable, and anger fueled my body as I limped to the door and out into the hallway. Veronica was about 10 steps in front of me, heading toward the stairwell. She dashed down the steps and ran over to the footman. Servants flew every which way. I staggered down the steps, one at a time, holding onto the balustrade in case my legs collapsed beneath me. When I finally made it to the landing, my chest was heaving and my lungs were burning as I dragged in air. Where now? She offered me a fur-lined cloak. Put this on. We're going by coach. I dragged the cloak around me and let Veronica lead me outside and into the coach. The snow was thin on the ground, which meant the sleds weren't necessary today. Stay warm, Veronica said, tossing a fur blanket over me from where she sat on the opposite side. I did as she said, though my head was still filled with hateful thoughts and my body shivered, unable to decide if I was too hot or too cold. The only thing that was saving me from keeling over at this point was my dragon growling inside my head, mad at my mate. She'd threatened to leave us again. Be with other men. He was pushing hard to grab her and show her how much we loved her. The poison wanted me to throw myself out of the carriage and lie down to die in the snow. The duality was maddening. I couldn't talk properly or think straight. We rode for a while through the town and past farming fields. I wanted to ask about where we were going, but my jaw was practically wired shut. I didn't trust myself to speak without saying something wrong or hurtful. So we travelled in silence until, finally, the rocking of the carriage stopped. Where are we? I bit out, the pain beginning to overwhelm me again. Everything hurt, throbbing hard. Come on, let's go. Veronica pushed open the door and got out of the carriage. I took a deep breath, not sure I had the strength for this next part of the journey if we had to walk far. Ian, get your ass out here. A smile quivered on my lips. There's my dragon princess. I hauled myself up off the carriage seat and fell down the steps to the ground, moaning as pain shot through me. Fuck me. If you can get your head and your body sorted out, I might just do that again. Let's go. Veronica marched off toward the foothills, boulders and darkened cave mouths stretching ahead of us. Where are we? I'd never seen this part of the Winter Kingdom before. Veronica didn't answer. She just disappeared into the mouth of one of the caves. It was late in the day, and the setting sun cast spectacular colours across the landscape. Burnt oranges, yellows and purple. I inhaled the chilly air through my nose and shivered. I had no idea if this was going to do anything good, but at this point, could it get any worse? I limped to the cave entrance, annoyed that she'd left me to make this walk by myself. Stupid, I knew, because I wouldn't have wanted her pity or her help. But in the moment, I wasn't thinking straight. And I knew it, so I forced the words and thoughts down and just concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other. As soon as I stepped into the cave, a wave of relaxation washed over me, and my thoughts felt less like they were tumbling around in a washer. You weren't joking. Steam rose from pools of crystal-clear water inside the cave. Veronica was lighting candles and lanterns. My dad kept this as his private sanctuary for a while. The one place that was truly his while he rebuilt his kingdom. Then he brought Mom here, and they opened it up to the people. I glanced around. Looks like no one really uses it now. No. I think the people still thought of it only as the king's place. They never really came much, but Mom and Dad did bring us here, and I always felt, I don't know, healthier afterward. I hoped she was right. Veronica began to undress, stripping off her clothes to fold them and place them in a nearby basket. I watched, not moving. She was spectacular to look at. Skin as smooth and beautiful as silk. I ached for her, especially with those beautiful curves this close. Then I started, as I realized I hadn't thought about anything physical with her since I'd been brought back from the dead. Maybe there really was some truth to her story about this place having healing powers. For the first time in ages, I began to feel more like myself. Veronica's final pieces of underwear fell to the rocks at her feet, and she scooped them up to put them in the box alongside the other clothes. She stood on the side of a pool, facing me. The curve of her breast was lit up by a lantern positioned behind her. The still angry flame in my gut began to ebb in the presence of desire unexpectedly growing once more. "Come and swim, Ian," she said. "I'm not giving up on you. We'll get you better, no matter what. As long as you don't give up on yourself. That's what made me so angry earlier. I couldn't bear it if—" She shrugged and turned to the water. "Come on." She waded into the pool, not waiting for me, the clear waters rising as she descended, caressing her hips, her back, her breasts. Then she was submerged almost to her neck, smiling at me in anticipation, her long hair floating around her like a mermaid. "Well? Coming?" I began to undress. First my shirt, then my pants. And then a thought struck me and I paused. But my poison, my blood. What if I ruin the spring, Veronica? She shrugged, her breasts bobbing in the water, drawing attention to her strawberry-pink nipples. "A price I'll happily pay for your health, Ian. We'll drain the pools and start again." "A second chance," I whispered, limping toward the spring, fully naked. Everything still hurt, but whether it was the rocks or the steam or the fact my mate was forcing me into the light, I felt markedly better. Clearer in my head. She nodded. I stepped into the water, the heat surprising me. "Whoa, that's hot." She smiled, reminding me of a siren calling me to throw myself into the sea. "No, it's only warm, I promise. Your body is out of whack because of the fever you've had, so the contrast will burn for a moment. It will settle.
Just keep walking. Come to me." My dragon rose up inside of me, not making me shift, but controlling my limbs, forcing me forward. I took one step, then the next, and then another, reaching for the woman who'd travelled worlds to keep me alive. Chapter 14. Veronica. I was playing it as calm and cool as I could, but I wanted to rip Ian's clothes off his gorgeous, damaged body. My body was on fire for him. But I had to give him time to recover. If he could recover from whatever darkness he had sunk into. I only hoped the waters here in the hot spring were as powerful as my parents had said they were. I'd lied to Ian, saying I could just go away and ignore my call to mate with him. Maybe I could have if I'd stayed away, but now that I'd come back and knew how it felt to be so drawn to him, so connected on a level I'd never felt before, there was no turning back. When he finally submerged himself in the waters, I watched his face intently. He'd had this strange dark shadow hovering over him since he woke up. Almost not there when I tried to stare directly at it, but it had cast a shadow over his face and left a sour taste in my mouth. But as I stared, the shadow seemed to dissipate and his features became clear. "How are you feeling?" I asked, worried that I was only imagining the improvement. He leaned back, dipping his hair in the water, then dropped down to submerge himself completely. When he finally came back up, a true Ian smile was on his lips, and my heart began to pitter-patter way too fast. Was he finally coming back to being himself? "So much better," he said. "How did you know this would work?" "I didn't. But we had to try something, didn't we?" The healer had said there was no hope, and my father's advice wasn't going to do more than make Ian think twice about dying. I had to do something drastic to help him. Say something provocative. Despite being the second son, the spare to the heir, Anselm, Ian was the king of my heart. He was a dragon, through and through. And he would protect me to his dying breath. I just knew it. I waded over to him, unafraid now. "Kiss me." His hands reached for my waist, dragging me closer. I slid my fingers up his arms, and, when I reached his shoulders, I jumped up in the water, opened my legs, and let them float around his waist. When we both stopped shaking and the world around us became quiet once more, Ian carried me back into the shallows. "Can we stay here for a while?" I asked, barely able to keep my eyes open. "It's so warm, so calming." Ian nodded and drew me over to a naturally occurring alcove where he could sit, and then he set me onto his lap and encouraged me to rest my head on his shoulder. "You sleep, beautiful. I'll watch over you." I smiled, my mind casting back to times when I was younger. I'd never seen it before, but Ian had always watched over me. Grabbed my parents when things got too heated with my brothers, even saved me from falling off my balcony once. I chuckled and he whispered, "What are you laughing at?" My eyes were closed, but I said, "You, saving me from falling that day. The balcony rescue, remember?" He groaned. "I certainly do. You almost gave me a heart attack." I nestled into him, hoping the water around us was healing Ian's body as it was mending the rift between us. "You yelled at me so bad, I didn't talk to you for a year after that." The memory made me smile now. He sighed, though, sadly. "I know." I lifted my head and forced my eyes open to look at him. "I'm sorry I didn't understand. I thought you hated me, but you were just looking out for me, weren't you?" He nodded, his blue eyes dark with intensity. "I was trying to." I smiled and ducked my head again, pressing against his chest. "I wish we'd been born at the same time, then we would have both known we were meant to be." His arms squeezed tightly around me. "Sleep, my beautiful princess.
Because tomorrow I'm marrying you, and you won't get much sleep after that.
I was already drifting, sleep claiming my blissed-out body. Tomorrow, huh? He chuckled and kissed the top of my head.
Sleep.
Chapter 15. Ian. I wasn't kidding when I told Veronica we were getting married tomorrow. I wasn't giving her another day to start overthinking things and decide I hated her again. I could beg her to forgive me for being mean to her when she was a teenager for the rest of our days. Every day of our married life I'd start the morning with, "I'm sorry I ignored you for a month when you were 15. She was right when she said that she'd already proven she wanted me, that she'd literally dragged me back from the brink of death and re-established me firmly in the land of the living. I didn't know all the details, though, so when we got back to the castle, I tucked a worn-out Veronica into bed, got dressed, and went looking for Marianne. The sorceress was sitting in the library with a book and a glass of wine. I knocked on the already open door, not wanting to disturb her. She didn't even lift her head to greet me. "Come in, Ian." I limped in, the pain in my legs so much better than it had been hours ago. When I sat down in the armchair next to her, she finally looked up at me. "You're looking much better than you were earlier today." I couldn't resist making a joke. "You know what they say, love of a good woman and all that." Marianne assessed me, her eyes glowing violet in the light. "You're different somehow." "Veronica took me to these hot springs and we bathed there. I'm not sure what it did, but the pain is less. My thoughts aren't as dark. Significantly less so." She brought her drink to her lips and took a sip. "She saved you. Again." I nodded. "Is that twice or 3 times now?" Marianne turned in her chair toward me. "I'd count it as 3 myself." I chuckled. "All in the space of a few days. Imagine what the count will be at the end of our lives together." Marianne's eyes widened, then a large smile spread across her lips. "Is there to be a wedding?" I nodded. "Yes, tomorrow. I have to speak to Damon and Cass. Would you get word to everyone else? Mom, my sisters, everyone." She closed her book and stood up. "Yes, there isn't a moment to lose. When do you want everyone here? Really tomorrow, or just soon?" I stood also, shaking out my ankle as pain tingled down to my toes. "Tomorrow." She shook her head, but her smile was kind as she said, "As impatient as your father you are." Not many people compared me to my dad, King Stavrock. Those words were usually saved for Anselm. "I'll take that as a compliment." "Oh, you should," she said. "In lots of ways, you're more like him than your siblings. You have his fire, his heart. And that's the thing that sets Stavrock above most men. His good heart." I leaned forward and kissed Queen Marianne on the cheek. "Thank you." We began walking toward the doors. "Let's go speak to everyone now," Marianne said. "Cass isn't going to like the fact she won't have months to plan her only daughter's wedding." I shrugged. "I don't care so much for the party. I just want Veronica to be my wife." Marianne's approval was obvious in the warmth of her smile. "Well said." I reached out to stop her from floating away. "Can I ask you one more thing before we go?" "Of course." "What happened in Damon's bedroom? Everyone keeps saying Veronica saved my life, but all I remember is passing out, then coming to in so much pain. And the hatred in my heart had been terrible. I could still feel the shadow of it." Marianne blew out a long breath and pressed her hand over her heart. "Oh, well, that will be a story we will be telling our grandchildren. It is officially up there with Stavrock killing Magnic to save Lucy." I gulped. "You have to tell me now." She grinned, her white teeth flashing. You died. The poison in your leg took over your whole body and your heart stopped. I stared at her, barely able to believe it.
But no one comes back from death.
Marianne raised her eyebrows and gave me a knowing look. Veronica has been in the human world, learnt their tricks for saving people when their hearts stop. She managed to breathe life into you and keep your heart going while the healer flushed out your wound. My jaw dropped.
I don't even know what to say.
She laughed. Then she had the audacity to ask me to create lightning with my hands and start your heart again. I've never been so scared in all of my life. Now I had 100 questions for the woman who would soon be my wife.
Sounds like Veronica learnt a lot from her time away.
Marianne nodded. She certainly did. It is only because of her that you're here, alive and well. Your parents didn't lose a beloved son. Veronica didn't lose her fated mate. And you, lucky man, didn't lose your life. I swallowed down the lump in my throat. I owed her far more than I'd realized.
I can't.
Marianne lay her hand on my sleeve. Let's go talk to Cass and Damon. You can thank Veronica for your life later. Yes. Actions spoke louder than words, always.
You're right, Aunt Marianne. Let's go.
And together we went in search of Veronica's parents. Cass and Damon were surprised by my request, but in the end they laughed and jumped to help. Though not before Cass let out a screech and fluttered her hands over her breasts. Tomorrow? Tomorrow? Oh, my God! She raced off to the kitchens to get the staff started on a royal banquet, and Theo offered to fly to the other kingdoms to pass on the invitations.
Thank you, brother,
I said to Theo, who punched me in the arm in return.
You could have told me Veronica was yours.
I laughed and ran a hand through my hair, frazzled as ever. I was going to get a lot of those remarks.
Yeah, well, I was a coward, mate. What can I say?
Theo grabbed me in a hug.
Welcome to the family.
Then he took off. It was late and dark, but Theo wouldn't be delayed. He stripped and took to the skies, taking my invitation with him. Tomorrow my whole family would appear, and I'd be belted by all of them for not telling them the truth about Veronica earlier. I smiled as I walked back to my mate's bedroom and joined her in her big, warm bed. Nothing mattered anymore. Not my pride. Not my fear. All that mattered was my love for the woman in my arms and the future that we would build together. The next morning, I told Veronica my plans, and, true to character, she reacted with equal measures of violence and excitement. "You're kidding me, right?" she said, sitting up and whacking me in the chest.
Ow.
I sat up too.
I told you yesterday I wanted to marry you tomorrow.
Yes, but I thought you were joking. She glared at me with all the fire she possessed. I glared back at her.
I wasn't. I want you as my wife. Now. Today. I don't want to wait a moment longer.
"And what about what I want?" she demanded, sliding out of bed so she could stand and put her hands on her hips. I was treated to the full Veronica glare this time, her eyes flashing with passion. She looked magnificent. I leaned back against the headboard, still confident in my decision.
"And what do you want, Veronica?"
"I want—" she huffed. "I want—" I grinned at her.
"Do you want 3 months so you can plan the flowers and the dresses and the—"
She groaned and threw her hands up in the air. "Hell no! I hate all that stuff." I threw back the bedcovers, walked over to her, and dropped down onto one knee. Luckily, my leg was much better since bathing in the healing spring.
"Then marry me. Today. If you want a fancy party in a few months, we can do that too. But today, please, become my wife. Let me commit the rest of my life to you, and I'll do anything you want. We can go live in the human world for a few years even, if that's what you want." She frowned down at me, then whispered, "You really love me?" A laugh burst from my lips. "Hell yes. You've already proven you'll fight death back to save me. Now you've got to give me the chance to prove that I love you just as much." She moved closer, a smile playing on her lips. "What about your parents? And your sisters? Don't you want them here?" I nodded. "Yes. Theo flew off last night to tell them." She rolled her eyes. "Of course he did. Everyone's conspiring against me." Slowly, I rose up to my feet. "If you really don't want to marry me." Her hands pressed into my chest, holding me in place. "No, no, no. I'm sorry. Ask me again." She took a step back and held her breath. I knew I shouldn't laugh, but I was close to it. My beautiful girl had to fight her temper at every turn. I reached out and gripped her hands, which were trembling. "Veronica, Princess of the Northern Kingdom. My beloved. My fated mate. The woman I love with all of my heart. Would you do me the great honor of marrying me today?" Her eyes glistened with sudden tears, and she nodded vigorously. "Yes, I'd love that, Ian." I swept her up into my arms, my heart soaring with joy. "Then let's get started." She hugged me tight, but as I put her down on the bed, she started pushing at me. "Don't start any of that stuff yet. You shouldn't even be seeing me today. So go, go, go." I gaped at her. I pointed at the door. "Quickly! It's bad luck for you to see me before the wedding, and I don't even know what my dress looks like yet. Go!" I shook my head, the blood taking its time to drain away from my groin. "Looks like we're waiting for tonight." I scooped up my clothes and quickly dressed before heading to the door. Veronica was already in the bathroom, and I heard the shower start. "Hey, dragon daughter. See you tonight." "Go!" she yelled back, and I left her room with a grin on my face. My life with Veronica would never be boring, that was for sure. Chapter 16. Veronica. An array of dresses my mom had assembled for me to choose from were laid out on her bed. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Her voice held excitement. Clearly I'd made her, and Dad too, no doubt, very happy. Hell, I was happy. I couldn't wait to marry my mate. I assessed the dresses and pointed. "Great choices, Mum. But I'm thinking this one. What do you think?" I picked up the long flowing gown embellished with embroidered flowers and beads. It wasn't my usual style, but it called to me somehow. Mom put her hand over her mouth like she was about to burst into tears. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded and took her hand away from her mouth. "Oh, yes. I just didn't think you'd like that one. I almost didn't put it out. But it's my favourite for you." I glanced over at the other plainer choices. Mum had been thoughtful in her selection, choosing dresses in a range of colours as well as white. I smiled at her. "No, this is the best. I love it." The seamstress rushed over and slipped it out of my hands, a big smile on her face. "This won't take long to adjust to your size, Princess. You're the same build as your mother when she wore it, and almost exactly the same age." My mouth dropped open, and I turned to Mom, stunned. It was my turn to almost burst into tears. "Is this your wedding dress, Mom? It's beautiful. Why haven't I seen it before?" She reached out an arm to me, and I grabbed her hand and squeezed it. "You were never interested in such things before," she said. "You wanted to be out in the farmlands with your father.
while Her eyes were swimming with tears, and I rushed into her arms to hug her tight. "I love you, Mum. Thank you for throwing this crazy wedding together for me." She laughed and squeezed me back. "Crazy is right. A day to prepare. Though I don't blame Ian for wanting to rush. He adores you and doesn't want to give you a chance to get away again." When I pulled back and looked up at her, there were tears on her cheeks. "Why are you so emotional today, Mum? Because of the wedding?" Her lower lip quivered a little as she inhaled deeply, obviously trying to get herself together. "Yes and no. This is the start of the rest of your life, baby girl. And I'm just so relieved." I laughed as the seamstress began to pull my clothes off to get me into my mother's dress. "Why? Were you worried that no one would ever have me?" I wouldn't have been surprised if she said yes. "Oh, no." Mum helped me pull up the sleeves and began doing up the tiny buttons at my back while the seamstress pulled out a tape measure and a little tub of pins. "It's not that. It was just, I knew that you would be uncompromising in love. That only a fated mate would do. Like your father and I." The last of the buttons were done up, and I shuffled over to the mirror, wanting to get a better look. The woman who stared back at me was someone I didn't recognize. Wow! I couldn't believe how beautiful the dress was. It transformed me into someone far more elegant than I usually felt. "Mum, I love it." She kissed my hair and smiled at my reflection. "And I love you." The seamstress fluttered her hands at my mother, and she fell back to allow pins to be stuck in various places so the dress would fit me like a glove when the little alterations were done. I took a deep breath to calm down and let the intensity of emotions caused by the beautiful dress dissipate. My mum hadn't always been super affectionate, but her love for me had always been there. Behind the words I'd taken as lectures, she'd always tried to keep me safe. "Thank you for my life, Mum." I met her surprised gaze in the mirror. "If I'm half the mother you are, one day my children will be blessed." The Queen's eyes suddenly became very glossy once again, and she didn't say a word. Instead, her mouth wobbled, and then she nodded, squeezed my hand, and quickly left the room. I glanced down at the seamstress who was pinning the hem. I was a little shorter than my mum, obviously. Did I just make her cry again? The woman chuckled but didn't look up from her task. At least they were happy tears. True. After the fitting, I had breakfast in my room, my mum and other servants bringing me various wedding-related things to make decisions about. Flower arrangements, coloured fabrics, food choices. She had me tasting soups, desserts, meats. I laughed as my mother shoved yet another plate of food at me. This time it was a platter of roast vegetables. "This is like my birthday, but 10 times as lavish." "Well, I'm trying to shove 3 months' worth of organisation into one day, sweetheart." I picked up the fork and readied myself to taste. "You're not mad, though, are you, Mum?" She shook her head. "Oh, no. We probably would have killed each other if we'd had 3 months to fight over table settings. Imagine it. This way, we haven't fought at all. We don't have time." I tasted 2 of the potatoes and pointed. "That one's better." She nodded and took the plate away to replace it with pumpkins. I looked up at her. "You really think we would have killed each other?" She laughed. "Probably not, sweetheart, but you got your forthright manner from me, and when there's a tight deadline, we both shine. So today is going to be amazing." She was right. I gave her my sunniest smile before digging into the roast pumpkin. Then my doors burst open. "Dragon daughter!" Vanya came marching into the room with her sister. "I can't believe you're Ian's mate. We all practically fell over when we heard." I jumped up and ran to the girls I'd always looked up to. I launched at them, hugging them tight. "I doubt you were as shocked as me, but there is one amazing bonus to becoming Ian's wife. "What's that?" Vanya asked. I beamed at them. "I finally get to have you both as sisters." Everyone squealed, and another tray was wheeled in, this time full of cocktails and wines. Mom walked over to the trays and grabbed a drink. "Come and join the party, ladies. Time to get ready." The next few hours were bliss, surrounded by the powerful women in my life. My mom, Marianne and Lucy, my aunts and all their offspring. We laughed, told stories, and had too many cocktails, including some I'd learned to mix while nannying in Greece. When the maids came to do my hair and makeup, my beautiful family left me alone to get ready themselves. The only one who stayed, other than the maids, was Marianne. She sat back and watched as one of the maids curled my hair and another applied makeup to my face. "Does everything look okay?" I asked the Queen of the Black Mountains. This sort of thing was so out of my comfort zone. "Oh yes," Marianne said, her purple eyes soft as she smiled at me. "As you know, I don't have a daughter, and on my son's wedding days, I stayed with them rather than joining in with the women. Today has been lovely." "I'm so glad you could join us," I said, sounding far too much like my mother with the political and polite response. I frowned, then shook myself. Marianne laughed. "Yes, Veronica. You are a queen, in your heart and in your blood. Never doubt that." And with those words, she stood up, kissed me on the forehead, and left the room. I watched her go, then looked into the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman who looked nothing like the girl I'd been yesterday. Thank you." I lifted my hand to touch my hair, amazed at how great a job they'd done. "Now, let's get you into your dress, princess." The maid stood me up, pulled my dress on, and did up the buttons. When I finally walked over to look at the mirror again, even I was impressed with what had been pulled together in a day. A knock at the door and a male clearing of the throat told me my father was here. "Come in, Dad." When he walked in, he sported a huge grin on his face.
"You always know when it's me. Wow. Veronica. I didn't expect. I remember that dress."
I turned to face him so I could meet his gaze in reality and not just via our reflections in the mirror. "Mom said I could wear it." He swallowed hard, his throat working a moment before he said,
"You look beautiful."
"Thanks, Daddy," I whispered, my heart almost full to bursting. Then I laughed to try and reduce the emotion. "I want to hug you, but that would wreck all the work they've just done on my hair and makeup."
"Then later," he said, "after everyone else has seen you."
He held out his elbow, and I walked toward him, grabbing hold of the strongest man I'd ever known, aside from Ian. "You like Ian, right, Dad?" King Damon smiled.
"Oh, sweetheart, the only thing that's important is that you like him. But yes, he is a great man. I'm definitely stealing him from Stavrock's castle and keeping him here. He's good for our people. And I'm very happy that you and he are marrying today."
I nodded. "Yes, he is a great man. It took me a while to realize that, but now—" I blinked back tears. I was becoming as emotional as Mom. Ian liked to help people. Dad had told me that. And I knew it to be true. He had a huge heart. "He suits us, doesn't he?" I said. Dad nodded, then frowned at me.
"You're not second-guessing your choice, are you? Because if you are, we can call it off."
I squeezed his arm hard. "Don't you dare!" I couldn't imagine living another day without Ian. Not to mention the fact that my mind kept circling back to that first vision Anthony had shown me. I could be pregnant right now. I wouldn't know. But the thought of it filled me with joy. Dad grinned and puffed up his chest.
"That's what I want to hear. Let's do it, baby girl."
The servants opened the doors for us, and we walked out of my room and down toward the ballroom, where the wedding and reception were being held. "Does everything look good in there?" I asked.
Your mother has done a wonderful job." The pride in his voice was evident now. "I think you're going to love it." When we reached the entrance to the ballroom, the doors were decorated with ribbons and my favourite white lilies. "Oh, wow, that does look great." Dad laughed. "Oh, this is only the beginning." He nodded at the footman who opened the double doors. "You ready?" he asked again. "Or should we take another lap?" I pulled at his arm, forcing him forward. "I'm more than ready to be with Ian forever. Don't make me walk down this aisle by myself, Dad." He laughed loudly, and together we entered the ballroom and walked down the aisle of red carpet my mother had managed to set up. There were rows of chairs full of people and flowers everywhere. My favourite people in the whole world lined the aisles. Ahead of me was Ian, standing in a suit, waiting near the elder who would perform the ceremony. As soon as I saw him, my heart soared and I had eyes for no one else. I began to walk a little faster. I wanted my father to hurry up now. I needed to be with my mate. When we finally reached the end of the carpet, Ian reached out a hand. My dad took my hand and placed it in Ian's. It was a symbolic gesture that, despite my modern thinking, I loved. My father's approval of our union was important to me. "Thank you," Ian said, gripping my fingers. Then he pulled me forward and kissed me. A titter of laughter went up around the room, and I pushed back, but not quite out of his arms. I enjoyed having him hold me in that way. I glared at him, but playfully. "I think that part's at the end of the ceremony." He grinned, puffing out his chest. "You've never played by the rules, beautiful. Why start now?" "So true." I grinned back at him and glanced around, feeling the love of my family and friends swell and meet me. When I looked back at my soon-to-be husband, I was overwhelmed with happiness. "I love you, Ian." His eyes heated, full of promise for the future. "And I love you, beautiful Veronica." The elder began to speak, and together Ian and I took the first step into our new life. Epilogue. 3 years later. Veronica. In the end, we didn't get pregnant right away. Quite the opposite. We discussed it and decided we wanted time to enjoy being together, being married, being young. So we worked side by side in my father's fields, building homes and digging trenches for new crops. Then we went travelling in the human realm, and I showed him Greece and then Spain. He loved the warmth and the beauty of the human realm as much as I did. We went swimming in ice-cold oceans and drank cocktails beside swimming pools, and I had never been happier in my life. We did things that no other dragon shifters had done, or none that I knew of anyway. It was amazing. And I was so blessed to have Ian by my side for the adventure of life. When I found out I was pregnant, I had a strong hankering for my mom. I wanted to go home to my family. So we did. 3 years almost to the day since we'd been married. On our return, I stood in the upstairs library, my hand on my growing belly. I glanced out the window and couldn't stop the huge smile at the incredible happiness I felt. I was content with my life in a way I never thought I'd be. Footsteps made me turn, and I suddenly got an incredibly strong feeling of déjà vu, a memory of this exact moment flashing into my brain. Oh wow, I realised. This is the moment I saw all those years ago. Tears filled my eyes as I turned to face my husband and walk toward him. "What's wrong?" he asked, jogging to close the distance between us as soon as he noticed my tears. I held out my arms, and he swept me into his embrace before leading me to the couches. "Are you okay?" he asked, his hand hovering near my belly. "Is it the baby?" I shook my head and wiped away the bothersome tears. Bloody pregnancy hormones. "No, I'm fine. So is she." We'd both decided our baby was a little girl.
We wouldn't know for sure, of course, until the day she was born, but we only had a girl's name picked out. It was going to be very awkward in that delivery room if our baby came out more like his father than expected.
Then what is it?
The baby shifted and rolled, so I pulled Ian's hand forward to the place on my belly where he'd be able to feel her hands and feet. I just realized that this is the moment I saw all those years ago, when Anthony accidentally gave me a vision before I went to the human realm. This, exactly this. I glanced around and pointed. I saw the stained glass window. I saw myself like this. I cupped my belly. Then I heard footsteps and turned around, and it was you. He grinned at me.
So it all came true, huh?
Yeah, and you know what was even more shocking to me in that vision than the fact that you were my mate? He huffed out a laugh.
I'm almost afraid to ask, but sure. Tell me.
I whacked him softly on the arm. Don't be afraid to ask. It's not bad. He gripped my chin softly, then leaned forward and kissed me on the lips.
Okay, tell me.
It was how happy I looked in that moment that shocked me more than anything else. Ian pushed my hair back off my face and tucked it behind my ear in a move as gentle as it was considerate.
How come, beautiful?
Because back then I was so unsettled, angry almost all of the time. I couldn't imagine being so happy. Pregnant. Married. It just seemed so unbelievable. I thought it must be a lie, or my mind playing tricks. I just couldn't understand how I could ever reach a place of such joy.
I'm glad.
Ian put an arm around my shoulders and slid close beside me so he could stare out the window too.
I feel exactly the same. So happy, as if life has fallen into place exactly as it was meant to, for both of us.
He huffed out an amused breath.
Looks like we're meant to be after all.
I kissed my husband's cheek, then lay my head on his shoulder, enjoying snuggling against him. His gorgeous scent rose around me, and I drew it into my lungs. Of course we are. I never doubted it. I giggled as he shook with laughter, but didn't raise my head again. My beautiful prince knew me better than anyone, but that didn't mean I couldn't still tease him a little. Life really could be as perfect as a dream, and it took our fated mate love to prove it.